Hey guys, tonight we step inside the echoing marble halls of the Royal Palace at Westminster. The evening of October 3rd, 115. The candlelight flickers on tapestries depicting fatted cattle and golden wheat. Ironic, since the real thing is nowhere to be found tonight. A bone chill rides the wind through the cracks in the stone walls. Behind you, the kitchens are deathly quiet. No clang of pots, no smell of roasting meat. Only the faint, sour tang of yesterday's boiled cabbage clinging to the air. Outside, the rain is falling, again as it has for months, and you're not just a guest, you're here to witness a disaster in slow motion, with courtiers whispering behind velvet sleeves and a king whose smile is stretched thinner than his larder. Servants file into the great hall with platters covered by domes of polished brass. But when the covers lift, there's an awkward silence. A few wilted turnips, hard black bread, something grey and unidentifiable swimming in thin broth. You feel the anticipation collapse into panic. No haunch of venison, no fragrant loaves, just the taste of disappointment and a stomach already groaning. Someone tries to break the tension with a joke about slimming for the latest Italian fashion, but nobody laughs. You're about to learn in all the wrong ways just how much a king depends on what grows in the peasant's field. You probably won't survive this one unless you've got a secret turnip stash under your mattress. If you're listening right now, drop your city and local time in the comments. Would you share your last loaf with a king? Stick around as we find out just how low a crown can stoop when famine hits. For tonight, the power's in the hands of the hungry. All right, let's start. There's no going back and no refilling your goblet tonight. The king sits at the center of the table, his robes dazzling but his face shadowed by anxiety. His hands are steady as he raises his goblet. Got to keep up appearances, but you see the faint tremor in his jaw, the clenched muscle just below the ear. You know that look. He's holding back a curse, or maybe just his appetite. The queen, pale as the winter moon, dabs delicately at her lips, eyes fixed on the sad parade of roots and crusts. Her ladies-in-waiting look, ready to faint, but not from modesty this time. The court musician plucks a hesitant tune on his lute. One string forever out of tune, like the whole palace is now. Somewhere, a dog barks, probably because it too is starving, and contemplating the ethics of eating its master. Courtiers murmur behind their napkins. You catch snippets. Last year there was roast peacock at every table. His Grace has sent for grain from France. My cousin in the country says there's nothing left but nettles and bark. Every story is grimmer than the last. The chief steward, poor soul, hovers near the king's shoulder, sweating despite the chill. His job is to maintain the illusion, to refill plates with invisible plenty, to apologize with the subtlety of a diplomat. He leans in. Your Majesty, the kitchen reports a delivery, 3 bushels of barley, but it is infested. The king's nostrils flare. Boil it anyway, he hisses. Nobody will notice. Spoiler, everyone will notice, especially tomorrow morning. The door creaks, and a courier sloshes in, mud to his knees, hair plastered to his forehead. He carries a single letter, sealed in crimson wax. The king snatches it, reads, and for a heartbeat, you see hope, then rage. Nothing, he mutters, crumpling the parchment. The bishop writes that all their stores are gone. Even the monks are begging. He doesn't say what for. Grace, or a miracle, or maybe just a mouldy biscuit. You look down the table, lords and ladies, faces pinched and anxious, clutching their goblets as if a genie might appear and grant them a wish. Everyone tries to act normal. Someone, a minor lord from Norfolk, makes a desperate play for favour by announcing, "My wife claims she can make a stew from acorns." The queen's lips twitch. Maybe she's thinking, would it pair with last year's Bordeaux? But the humour is brittle as dry straw. Suddenly, a commotion at the servants' entrance. A pair of footmen struggle in, carrying what looks like a burlap sack, heavy but not heavy enough for good news. They dump it before the steward. He yanks it open, and out tumble a few shriveled onions, and something that might have once been a carrot. The entire room leans in, drawn by the morbid curiosity of hunger. This, it seems, is the bounty of the king's lands. You can hear the drizzle against the windows, relentless and pitiless. The palace is supposed to be a place of order and command, but tonight you're surrounded by uncertainty. Rumors swirl. Some say the king has sent soldiers to confiscate grain from country peasants. Others whisper that the royal family is hiding a private larder stuffed with honey and salt pork. One courtier suggests the king is fasting for religious reasons. The collective stomachs of the nobility beg to differ. Outside, the city is shrouded in darkness. Fires burn low to save fuel. The streets are quiet, save for the occasional cry of a child or the shuffle of a desperate thief. You imagine the peasants in their cottages, mud walls, leaky roofs and all, but at least they have their gardens. Or do they? Word is spreading that even the root cellars are empty. In the market, a loaf of bread is worth more than a gold ring. People trade secrets in whispers, but the only thing that's truly valuable now is food. Back in the hall, the king tries to change the subject. Talks of politics, war, maybe a new tax on imported wine. Nobody's listening. Hunger has a way of focusing the mind, and right now, all minds are focused on the lack of supper. You'd think a palace with its marble floors and gilded ceilings would be immune to famine, but tonight you realize how quickly the illusion shatters. A noblewoman coughs into a handkerchief, glancing at the king for permission to leave early. He nods, distracted, and a small exodus begins. People make excuses. Headache, your grace, a pressing letter from home, the gout is acting up. In reality, everyone's running off to see if there's anything edible left in their private chambers. There is. You wander the corridors, peering into alcoves where servants huddle, gnawing on crusts meant for the dogs. You overhear a pair of guards discussing a rumor. They say His Majesty's already pawned the royal jewels for a shipment of rye. That's why the crown looks dull tonight. The other snorts. Ain't nothing left to pawn but the throne itself. They laugh, but it's hollow like an empty stomach. Later, in the dim light of the chapel, you spot the king alone, kneeling. His prayer is not for victory in battle or wisdom in governance. He's begging, quite literally begging for bread, for mercy, for rain. The wax from 1,000 votive candles drips onto the flagstones, each drop a silent measure of royal despair. He crosses himself, rises, and returns to the hall with a mask of composure. Tomorrow, he'll face the hungry faces again. In the morning, you wake to the sound of shouting outside the palace gates. Peasants have gathered, holding placards scrawled with desperate pleas. Feed us or fall. They're angry, but mostly they're scared. A royal advisor rushes past you, muttering about sending an envoy to the countryside. We must appeal to their patriotism or their greed. Whatever works. Breakfast is worse than dinner. Thin porridge, watered down so far you can see the bottom of the bowl. The king makes a show of eating, but you can tell he's just moving the spoon around, pretending. Someone cracks a joke about the chef's new invisible bacon recipe. Even the king manages a weak smile. Behind closed doors, the council is in chaos. We must ration what's left, says one. We must seize what the peasants have hoarded, says another. A third, braver soul, suggests, perhaps, Your Majesty, we could ask the peasants for help. The silence that follows is almost comical. Ask, the king repeats. A king does not beg, but as he glances out the window at the restless crowd, you can see the truth dawning in his eyes. Tonight the king may have no choice but to bend the knee, figuratively, at least. Lunch is cancelled. Nobody wants to admit why. The kitchens are locked, and a guard stands watch to prevent pilfering. You hear a story, maybe true, maybe just gossip, about a nobleman caught trying to sneak a pigeon pie out of the larder. He claimed it was for the queen's falcon, but everyone knows the birds are starving too. As the day drags on, the palace grows colder. Fires are kept low to conserve wood. You see nobles wandering the halls, rubbing their hands, eyeing each other with suspicion and a touch of envy. Hunger has a way of stripping away civility. You catch sight of the chief steward again, frantically tallying what's left. Half a barrel of salt herring, a crate of wormy apples, a single wheel of cheese with a bite already taken out of it. Not exactly a feast. By dusk the mood is grim. The king gathers his most trusted advisors for a final council of the day. Maps are unrolled, lists are read, prayers are muttered. Send a message to every village, he orders. Tell them the crown is in need. Promise what we must. Pardon old debts. Grant new rights. If they help us now, we'll remember them. The advisors nod. but you can see skepticism in their eyes. They've heard promises before. Night falls, and the palace is as silent as the grave. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howls. A fitting soundtrack for a kingdom starving, for a king who's about to learn humility the hard way. You pull your blanket tighter and wonder if the king himself is begging for scraps. What chance do the rest of us have? Just as you're drifting off, you hear a whisper from the next chamber. Did you hear? The king's envoy is leaving at dawn. They're taking the royal crest and a begging bowl. Maybe tomorrow, things will turn around. Maybe not. For now, you sleep on an empty stomach, knowing you're in good company. Everyone from the king to the kitchen boy is dreaming of bread. If you step outside the palace gates the next morning, you're hit by a world transformed, not by gold and glory, but by grey, soggy despair. Forget everything you learned in fairy tales. The sky is not blue, the fields are not golden, and the smiling peasants of royal portraits are nowhere in sight. Instead, clouds like dirty wool hang low over the landscape, and the roads are rivers of mud. Your shoes. Let's be honest, you're lucky if you have shoes are caked and heavy within minutes. The air smells of wet earth, rotting straw, and the sour tinge of desperation. The king's royal messengers have just received their orders. They're to ride out and explain, in the politest possible terms, that His Majesty's table is, shall we say, a bit bare, and would the good people of the kingdom mind terribly assisting their sovereign in this time of need? You watch as the first envoy, a stout man with more pomposity than practical sense, tries to mount his horse, only to have it shy away from the wind. Not a great omen. He recovers, straightens his doublet, and gallops off toward the horizon, mud spattering his red cloak like the polka dots of defeat. Inside the council chamber, nobles are arguing, voices sharp with fear. "It's the weather," insists the Lord Chancellor, tapping a thick scroll. "The rains have never stopped. Our fields are drowned, our grain is mouldy, and the livestock don't even ask about the cows." Someone else, perhaps the Archbishop, leans in. "God is testing us, or punishing us, or maybe it's the Jews, or the witches, or the astrologers." Blame is bouncing around the room like a frantic sparrow, looking for any perch but the truth. Word travels quickly, even in a medieval world without Twitter. The countryside is already buzzing with rumours, and not all of them are kind. You eavesdrop on a pair of village women, heads wrapped in scarves, as they trudge to the well. "My cousin says a witch was caught cursing the barley. They hanged her, but the grain is still black." Her friend snorts. "It's not witches, it's the lords. They take, and now they want more. Let them eat their own gold." Back at the palace, the king has called for his court magician. You can't help but smirk a little. This is the man who claims to turn lead into gold and cure gout with toad spit. Today, the king wants answers. Why has the rain lasted so long? The magician, resplendent in a robe dotted with suspicious stains, peers into a bowl of water, tosses in some chicken bones, and announces gravely that Mars is in retrograde. The king tries not to roll his eyes. The court chaplain suggests a day of fasting and prayer. The king tries not to groan. He's already been fasting for weeks, whether he likes it or not. Outside, the countryside is suffering. The peasants, those anonymous, sunburned souls who actually grow the food, have lost 3 harvests in a row. You trudge alongside them in the fields, feet sinking into waterlogged furrows, while a cold wind bites through your patched tunic. The grain has rotted before it could be cut. The beans are withered. Even the weeds look sad. At night, the villagers huddle around weak fires, nursing children who won't stop crying, and elders who are getting skinnier by the day. The family pig, once a symbol of modest prosperity, has long since disappeared. If you're lucky, you've got a cabbage or two hidden under a floorboard. If you're really lucky, the rats haven't found it first. But you're not the only one feeling the pressure. Out in the open, peasants are muttering about the king, about the lords, about the endless demands for taxes and tithes. The bailiff comes around twice a month now, demanding grain that nobody has. His purse is as empty as his threats are hollow. Sometimes he leaves with a curse and an empty sack. Sometimes he doesn't leave at all. Last week, old Tom's sons chased the taxman off with sticks. They say the king will send soldiers. Tom's sons laugh. Let him come. Maybe he'll bring bread. In the village square, talk turns darker. People remember stories whenever the weather turns bad. The scapegoats multiply. It's always someone's fault. The miller, the midwife, the Jewish moneylender, the foreign trader. Superstition is as thick as the mud. There are whispers of a woman who keeps a black cat. She's watched extra closely. At church, the priest preaches about sin and repentance. But his sermons sound weaker every Sunday. His own belly is shrinking, and you suspect he's just as hungry as the rest. You pass a cluster of desperate villagers as they try to salvage something, anything, from last year's ruined field. One boy digs with a stick, hoping for a turnip that everyone else missed. A girl beside him watches the sky, muttering a half-remembered prayer for some. Her mother, face sharp with worry, keeps an eye out for the Lord's men. If they see you foraging, you could be accused of theft from the manor. It's a joke, really. There's nothing left to steal. Meanwhile, in manor houses and castles all across the land, the aristocracy is panicking. They thought famine was a problem for other people, peasants, beggars, maybe the urban poor. Now their own pantries are bare. You see a young nobleman, recently returned from court, staring in horror at the family's nearly empty larder. His mother wrings her hands. "How can we receive guests like this?" she asks, as if shame is worse than starvation. The servants, sensing change in the air, have begun to slip away, some to their families in the villages, others just to avoid being blamed for missing food. The local lord tries to keep up appearances. He calls for a feast, inviting neighbouring gentry to prove he's still got resources. The guests arrive, eyes hollow, clothes splendid but fraying. The feast is a sad parody. A little barley bread, a thin stew with no meat, a few dried apples. You try to hold in a snicker when one lady asks for wine and is given weak cider instead. Toasts are made to the king, but nobody really means it. Everyone is counting what's left in their own cellars and making private notes on which neighbour might be the first to go under. In the midst of this, the weather seems almost to be taunting you. One day of sunshine is followed by 3 of rain. The river floods, destroying what little hope of a late harvest remains. The bridges wash out, making travel nearly impossible. The king's envoys find themselves stranded, forced to barter for shelter and food with royal trinkets, brooches, silver spoons, even a ring or two. One unlucky messenger is turned away by a suspicious farmer who claims not to recognize the royal seal. If you're the king's man, go ask him for a meal. In the towns, things are no better. Bakers are mobbed, their loaves snatched before they cool. Market stalls stand empty, save for a few withered roots and the occasional desperate trader hawking miracle cures for hunger. A pouch of dried herbs, a vial of holy water. You watch as a crowd jostles a merchant selling a bag of acorns. "Boil them long enough and they won't kill you," he says, which is not exactly a comforting sales pitch. By the second week, everyone is looking for someone to blame. The lords blame the weather, the peasants blame the lords, the priests blame the witches, and the witches, well, they keep their heads down and hope nobody notices them. An edict is issued from the palace. Anyone caught hoarding food will be severely punished. Of course, this just makes everyone hide what little they have even deeper. One afternoon, the king's herald rides into a village square and unrolls a scroll. "By order of His Majesty," he intones, "all loyal subjects are called to contribute what food they can spare to aid the royal household in this time of distress." The crowd listens in stony silence. The village headman, an old man with a beard like a bramble patch, steps forward. "What about last year, when your soldiers took our grain for the army?" he asks, voice calm but carrying. "We nearly starved then. Now you want more?" The herald falters. The king is in need. The villagers laugh, bitter and hard. So are we. In private, the conversations are darker still. Some talk of fleeing to the forests, living off whatever they can hunt or gather. Others consider selling what's left, tools, clothing, even children, if it means surviving another winter. The old social order is creaking. The king's name, once spoken with awe, is now muttered with resentment or occasionally outright mockery. In the tavern, after a thin pint of ale, someone jokes, "Maybe the king should come and plough my field himself if he wants to eat." There are a few nervous chuckles. It's a dangerous thing to say, but the hunger makes everyone bold or reckless. At night, The churches fill up with people praying for rain to stop, for sun to shine, for a miracle. The priest leads a procession through the village, holding aloft the relics of some long-dead saint, hoping to scare the famine away. Children follow, carrying torches and singing hymns, but the songs sound flat, and the saints' bones do nothing to fill their bellies. Sometimes, the villagers cast longing glances at the manor on the hill. They know there's little left there, but old habits die hard. Maybe, just maybe, the Lord has a secret stash. Maybe he'll share, if only because he knows what happens to lords who let their people starve. You lie awake one night, listening to the rain drumming on the roof, the wind rattling the shutters, and your own stomach growling. The fire has gone out, and the chill creeps in. In the darkness, you wonder how much longer this can last. You think of the king in his palace, cold, hungry, surrounded by empty platters and empty promises. For the first time in your life, you feel almost sorry for him. Almost. In the morning, you join the rest of the village as they gather by the river. The headman is organizing a fishing party, hoping to net enough to stretch everyone's rations. The river is swollen and muddy, the fish scarce, but it's something to do besides sitting and waiting for the end. You watch the younger children scavenge for snails and frogs along the banks. Nobody is picky anymore. As the day wears on, you hear a new rumor. The king's own table is empty. He sent for help from neighboring kingdoms, but they're suffering too. His envoys have come back with nothing but stories of other starving lands. Some say the king is considering marrying off his daughter to a wealthy foreign lord just to get a dowry of grain. Others claim he's preparing to flee, leaving his people to fend for themselves. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. By nightfall, the mood has changed again. The hunger, the fear, the constant rain. It's all too much. A group of villagers gathers in the square, voices low but urgent. If the king can't feed us, what good is he? Someone asks. Nobody answers, but the question hangs in the air, heavier than any storm cloud. As you trudge home through the mud, you realize that the world has tilted. The king, the lords, the priests, even the weather, they're not on top of them anymore. The fields, the food, the power, it's all up for grabs, and nobody, not even a king, is safe from hunger. And still, the rain keeps falling. At dawn, before the birds even dare to risk a song, you're up and squelching through the village lane, following the tracks of royal envoys as they vanish into the muddy distance. The rain has let up for an hour, just enough to make you think the sky might be softening, but then the clouds close in again, low and sullen. Word is, the king's men are headed straight to the peasant fields. No detours, no fancy greetings, just the urgency of men who've gone from commanding to pleading in a matter of weeks. It's an odd reversal. In times of plenty, the king's retinue rides through villages like a wind, banners fluttering, hooves pounding, every peasant stepping aside and bowing low in the mud. Today, those same peasants are tending small, ragged plots on the edge of the manor's domain, eyes narrowed, backs bent, but when they look up, it's the royal messengers who avert their gaze. Power has shifted, at least for now, and everyone can feel it, prickling under their skin. You tag along behind a royal envoy named Sir Everard, once proud, now reduced to wearing a cloak that's been patched more than a beggar's blanket. His horse limps, probably just as hungry as its master. By his side trudges Father Ambrose, the village priest drafted into service because, apparently, desperate times call for desperate prayers. They stop at the boundary stone between the Lord's land and the commons, where the fields of wheat, what little survived, fade into the gorse and scrub of wild country. The first peasant family they approach is the Millers, a clan known more for their quick tempers than for their generosity. Sir Everard doffs his battered hat, forcing a polite smile. "Good people," he says, voice cracking from disuse. His Majesty humbly requests your assistance. Any grain you can spare, for the good of the kingdom. There's a silence you could slice with a butter knife if anyone had any butter. Old Mom Miller wipes her hands on her skirt, sizing him up as though she's about to haggle for a chicken. "Didn't see you here last harvest, sir," she says, "when your lot took half our rye. Now the king needs us? We're all out, like you." Father Ambrose steps in with a softer approach. "Charity, my children," he pleads. "The Lord rewards those who give." One of the Miller boys, no more than 10 but already sharp as vinegar, pipes up, The Lord can come take it himself if he's hungry. You stifle a laugh, but Sir Everard's mouth twists as he fights for composure. They try the next farm, and the next, repeating the same script. For the crown, for God, for the good of the realm. All the old appeals, worn thin by overuse. Sometimes, a peasant wife will hand over a single handful of barley or an onion, so shriveled it might pass for a stone. More often, they just shake their heads or turn away, their faces closed as shutters. These people have learned the hard way what happens when you give too much. Last year the king's soldiers swept through and took taxes in kind, grain, pigs, eggs, even seed, meant for next season's planting. The memory still stings, and the wounds have not healed. Here's the twist. Nobody in the palace expected. When the land goes hungry, the balance of power tilts. The peasant fields, usually taken for granted, dismissed as the back end of nowhere, are now the centre of the kingdom's attention. You see it in every small gesture: a peasant hiding a sack under his coat, a woman planting beans by moonlight, neighbours exchanging furtive glances as the king's men pass. Survival is the game, and everyone's a player, even if the rules change daily. A few villages away, another royal envoy, Lady Isolde, who would rather be anywhere but here, is making her rounds. She tries a different tack, offers of reward. The king is grateful, she tells a group of gathered villagers. He'll remember those who help him in this hour. There's a general snort of disbelief. Will he remember us when the rains return? Asks a farmer's wife, her arms folded like a shield. Lady Isolde manages a thin smile, but the answer is obvious. Promises from the crown are like spring sunshine, brief, pleasant, and soon gone. At midday the rain relents, long enough for you to see just how bleak the fields have become. A few green shoots poke through the waterlogged ground. Miracles, really, but most of the land is empty. Even the crows have moved on, tired of picking at wet straw. You overhear two peasants muttering as they walk the ridge. Used to be, the king's word meant something. Now he can't even get a bowl of porridge. The other spits into the mud. Maybe he should marry my daughter, at least she knows how to find wild garlic. Meanwhile, the royal envoys gather their meagre haul. By sunset, they have a small cart of half-rotten turnips, a bag of dried peas, and a goat that looks older than the castle walls. It's a pitiful offering for a palace, but more than the king had that morning. Sir Everard sighs. It will have to do. He thanks the villagers, who nod politely, but don't bother to hide their smirks. For once the peasants have bargaining chips, and everyone knows it. That night, back at the palace, you watch as the envoys report their success. The king listens, jaw clenched, as they recount tales of stubborn peasants, empty barns, and outright refusals. Some of the council urge harsher measures, send the soldiers, seize what they're hiding. Others caution against it. Push too hard, and there'll be riots. The king closes his eyes, weighing the options. He's not used to this kind of impotence. For generations, royal authority has been absolute, or so it seemed. Now hunger has knocked the scepter from his hand. You slip out into the gardens, or what's left of them. The kitchen staff are harvesting dandelions for salad, cursing under their breath. One cook, formerly in charge of roasting whole boars, is now an expert at foraging nettles and boiling bark. He catches your eye and shrugs. They say every king should learn humility. Guess we're all getting a lesson. The mood among the palace servants is a mix of exhaustion and grim amusement. The footmen joke about staging a great palace turnip hunt, complete with prizes for anyone who can find an edible root. The maids invent a new game. Guess what's for dinner? Spoiler, the answer is always not enough. One girl, Anna, confides that she's been sending scraps to her family in the village. Don't tell the steward. He's got eyes like a hawk and a temper like a wet cat. You promise to keep her secret, and for a moment, the gloom lifts. Outside, in the village, there's talk of organizing. Peasants quietly banding together, sharing news and resources, refusing to hand over their last stores no matter what the crown promises. Someone has started a rumor that the king himself has come down to beg at their doors. It isn't true yet, but the idea has a kind of delicious satisfaction to it. If the king wants bread, let him dig for it. The next morning, as the royal cart rattles back toward the palace, you walk beside the villagers. As they watch it go, There's pride in their eyes, but also fear. Hunger can make people bold, but it can also make them desperate. You overhear a farmer whispering to his wife, "This won't last, sooner or later they'll send soldiers. Or worse." She nods, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Let them come. We'll hide what we can and fight for the rest." For now, though, the peasant fields are the real power center. Every kernel of grain, every root, every egg is bartered, hidden or handed over with careful calculation. The king, once the master of all he surveyed, now finds himself begging from the very people he ruled. It's a lesson in humility he never asked for, and you get the sense that nobody, king or peasant, will forget it anytime soon. At the edge of the village, you see a ragged line of figures making their way toward the woods. Families, mostly, hoping to find mushrooms, wild onions, maybe a rabbit if luck holds. One old man carries a homemade spear, more for show than for hunting. As they disappear into the trees, you wonder how many will come back, and what stories they'll tell. Back in the palace, the mood is shifting from desperation to resignation. The king sits by the fire, turning a shriveled turnip in his hands. "So this is what it comes to," he murmurs. His advisor, too tired to flatter, simply nods. "For now, sire. Until the fields recover," the king sighs, staring into the flames. "If they recover," he adds quietly. You watch him for the first time as just another man, hungry, uncertain, and at the mercy of the land. And somewhere outside, in a peasant's cottage, a family shares a thin broth, laughing quietly at the idea that the king's dinner looks no better than theirs. The world for now has turned upside down. A new day means new orders, but not the sort the kingdom's used to. The king's envoys, mud-stained and grim, have returned, and the royal council gathers in a stony circle, voices hushed as if afraid to wake the famine itself. There's a desperate hope that somehow the age-old answer to every royal problem, raise taxes, will save them now. But this time, there's a problem. The peasants are flat out refusing. Not with petitions or appeals, but with outright barefoot, mud-caked rebellion. You see it begin at dawn, in the drizzling rain, as the tax collectors, once figures of fear, now objects of ridicule, march into the first village, led by the local bailiff. He tries to make a speech about duty to crown and country, but before he can finish, he's drowned out by jeers and the clattering of empty cooking pots. Women hoist them in the air, banging spoons and ladles like cymbals in a grim parody of festival days. Their faces are fierce, lined with fatigue and hunger, but their voices are strong. "No more. You took last year's seed. You took the eggs. Go ask your king to eat his gold." You tag along as the bailiff tries to save face, switching tactics and threatening fines, imprisonment, the stocks, but the villagers, usually so cautious, only grow bolder. "There's nothing left," a grey-bearded farmer says, stepping forward, arms folded across his chest. "Try to take it, and you'll have to eat my boots." A burst of laughter ripples through the crowd, though you notice it's edged with something sharp. The line between humour and violence grows thin when bellies are empty. The taxmen are not used to this kind of defiance. They push past the crowd, heading for the grain stores, but every door is barred. Every barn stands empty, or at least appears to. You catch sight of a teenage girl slipping out the back with a sack under her cloak. A few children dash into the woods, the dog yapping behind them, scattering like pheasants at the sound of hunters. The villagers have gotten clever. Every bit of food that's left is hidden or spirited away before the taxmen even arrive. This pattern repeats across the land. In one hamlet, the tax collectors find themselves met by a wall of bodies, grandparents, mothers with babes in arms, boys with slingshots, all standing shoulder to shoulder in the muddy square. No violence, not yet, just a simple, stubborn refusal. You overhear one collector muttering, "They're not afraid anymore." Another snorts, "Maybe they're just too hungry to care." Either way, the result is the same. The king's men leave empty-handed, their threats useless. But not every encounter ends peacefully. By midday, word spreads that in a larger market town, things have turned ugly. You rush to the scene, heart pounding, as shouts echo down narrow lanes, and a crowd surges toward the tax office. Here, the refusal has boiled over into rage. The townspeople, merchants, craftsmen, beggars, even a few battered old soldiers, are pushing back. You see the bailiff's hat knocked off, his fine coat spattered with dung. A baker, once terrified of royal authority, hurls a stale loaf at the officials, hitting one square in the chest. "There's your tax," he roars to general cheers. The bailiff tries to call for order, but his voice is lost in the roar. Someone throws a rock, someone else lets loose with a bucket of muddy water. The crowd surges, and the king's men are forced to retreat, slipping and stumbling, their dignity soaked and bruised. One official drops his tally book, which is quickly scooped up by a cheeky girl who uses it for kindling. The king's laws, at least today, go up in smoke. Back in the palace, the news spreads like wildfire. For centuries, the nobility has relied on taxes to keep the machinery of royal life running. Feasts, tournaments, wars, the endless luxuries of court. Now, with nothing coming in and the countryside openly defiant, panic sets in. You overhear whispered conversations in the corridors. What if they rise up? What if the peasants refuse everything, forever? Even the royal guard is nervous. After all, hungry men make poor soldiers, and loyalty only lasts as long as the bread holds out. Lunch is another meagre affair. Thin broth, a scrap of cheese, a few blackened apples. The king barely touches his food, staring out the window at a sky that refuses to clear. "It's never been like this," he mutters, half to himself. The court jester, trying to lighten the mood, quips, "Perhaps, sire, we could tax the rain itself." Nobody laughs. Even the jester is hungry, his jokes as dry as the bread. Meanwhile, the noble kitchens grow colder and emptier by the hour. You wander through the corridors, passing servants clustered around weak fires, whispering their own rumours. They say Lady Margaret fainted at breakfast. Nothing but water in her cup. The Duke's cook ran off last night, took a chicken and left a note, "Find your own supper." The younger pages dare each other to sneak into the wine cellar, not for drink, but to see if any crumbs remain on the platters. Upstairs, in the grand dining room, the tables are set with gleaming silver, but the plates are nearly bare. A row of noble children sits in silence, eyeing the serving platters with a longing, usually reserved for forbidden sweets. Their mothers try to keep up appearances, fussing over manners and posture, but you can see the fear in their eyes. It's not just hunger, it's the sense that the old world, the one where the nobility ruled by birth and by right, is slipping away like sand through open fingers. You duck into the servants' hall, where the gossip is less polite and more honest. "The lord's mistress hasn't eaten in 2 days," one maid confides. "He caught her trying to gnaw a candle." Another servant, the castle's ancient stable boy, shakes his head. "When the lords go hungry, you know it's bad. Used to be, if you nicked a carrot, they'd whip you. Now they'd thank you for it." The laughter is short, but it's there. Resistance, after all, isn't just in the streets, but in the stories people tell. In the countryside, the peasants take new precautions. Anyone seen talking to the king's men is treated with suspicion. Spies, everyone says. Food is hidden in ways that border on genius. Sacks sewn into mattresses, roots buried in dung heaps, eggs stashed in hollow trees. Children are taught to lie, to keep secrets, to say nothing about the last chicken or the pile of beans under the floorboards. Trust is now a luxury, and nobody, not even the priest, gets the whole truth. But hunger is an unpredictable master. Some, desperate and frightened, give in, hoping that by handing over what little remains, they'll earn favour, or at least be spared the king's wrath. You witness a heartbreaking scene. An old widow, her back bent like a bow, shuffling to the tax collector with her last 2 turnips. She sets them on the table, hands trembling. "It's all I have, sir. Please, let me keep the cow." The taxman, younger than you'd expect, looks away, ashamed. He takes the turnips, but you can see in his eyes he knows it's wrong. Not every story ends in pity. In the next village over, you hear of a family caught hiding grain in the church crypt. The lord's men drag them into the square and make a show of confiscating everything. The grain, the chickens, even the family's only blanket. It's meant as a warning, but all it does is harden the resolve of everyone watching. The lesson is clear. Compassion is scarce, and every day is a new test of endurance. As the days pass, the battlegrounds shift, no longer just about taxes. The struggle is for dignity and survival. You see entire communities organizing their own watchmen, ordinary villagers who take turns keeping an eye out for the king's men. They signal with bird calls or flashes of cloth, or the simple ringing of a bell when trouble is spotted on the road. There's a new sense of unity. Misery may not love company, but it sure does create alliances. One evening, a village square turns into a festival of defiance. A group of young men, faces gaunt but eyes alive, stage a mock royal parade. Someone wears a crown made of onion skins. Another carries a broom as a scepter, and a third rides an old goat, pretending to be the king's prized stallion. The whole village laughs until they cry, the kind of laughter that makes your ribs ache and your worries fade. If only for a moment. It's dangerous, this kind of jest, but it feeds the soul in ways bread never could. You walk home under a sky the colour of lead, the wind carrying the sound of distant singing. The peasants are refusing to surrender, and their rebellion grows with every failed tax raid, every empty granary, every new story of royal impotence. It's clear now the old system has cracked. Hunger has made equals of everyone, if only for a season. Still, you can't help but wonder, how long before things boil over? How long before jokes turn to rage, and hunger turns to violence? The king, for all his power, is just one bad harvest away from losing everything. Tonight, as you lie awake listening to the thunder in the distance, you realize the truth. Sometimes, all it takes to shake a kingdom is a field of empty bellies and a few brave souls who finally say, no more. You wake to a silence that's heavier than the rain. Even the birds seem to have given up. Somewhere down the corridor, a door creaks. The sound that once meant a servant beginning the day, a kitchen bustling into action. The aroma of bread baking, now it means someone else, noble or lowborn, searching for something, anything, to eat. The king's palace, long a beacon of plenty, feels stripped bare. Every marble column, every tapestry, every glittering goblet only serves to remind you how cold and hungry things have become. Today the noble kitchens stand empty, and the first rumblings of real fear begin to gnaw at the upper crust. It's strange, almost darkly funny, how quickly hunger erases the old divisions. Not so long ago the royal family and their nobles feasted while the peasants went to bed hungry. Now, you see a countess, cheeks hollowing, peering into an empty larder with the same desperation as any village mother. The head cook, once a tyrant over a kingdom of spices and roasts, is now the humblest forager, collecting limp cabbages and mouldy onions, trying to stretch them with water and prayer. In the servants' quarters the kitchen boys dig through bins for scraps and peelings, and you catch a pair of noble children sneaking into the kitchens to hunt for crumbs. There's no scolding now. Dignity is as rare as flour. The court tries to maintain routines. A breakfast bell rings, summoning courtiers to the high table, but all that's served is a thin, pale gruel. The king's cupbearer, who once poured wine older than he was, now brings plain water, apologizing for the lack of honey. Courtiers trade jokes about fasting for holiness and the latest French diet, but their eyes dart from plate to plate, counting every bite. You hear a knight mutter that he started dreaming about roast chicken, only to wake up chewing his own tongue. Another noble, a once plump baron, has taken to hoarding a single dried fig in his pocket for luck. Outside, the palace grounds are no longer scenes of leisure and show. The gardens, once decorative, have been turned over to beans, cabbages, and wild greens. The queen herself is seen kneeling in the mud, digging with a trowel, her hands caked and raw. The royal children help gather weeds and dandelions. A gentle ribbing starts among the staff. If the king's heir turns into a turnip, at least he'll be well fed. Laughter, brittle as it is, becomes a form of resistance. But the real blow falls hardest on those who believe themselves immune. The noble kitchens, usually the heartbeat of courtly life, are ghostly. The head cook, Master Geoffroy, surveys his domain like a defeated general. You see him chalking up menus that look more like surrender notices. Day 1, root soup. Day 2, root soup, thinner. Day 3, consider boiling shoes. He tries every trick he knows, roasting stale bread over coals for crispness, stretching broth with nettles, even catching and stewing rats. The latter is a closely guarded secret, and the one time a guest finds a whisker in her bowl, She faints with theatrical disgust. No one blames her. The king's advisors try to hide the scale of the crisis. They order the kitchen doors kept closed and restrict access to the pantries. But rumours seep through like water. The palace staff share stories in whispers of the Dowager Duchess fainting in chapel, of the royal dogs eating better than the pages. One night you glimpse a chamberlain sneaking away with a roast bone, only to be chased by 3 starving hounds. The old rules, no food for servants after dark, never touch the Lord's cheese, are quietly forgotten. Desperation breeds odd alliances. In a shadowed alcove, you catch the steward trading a scrap of dried beef for a bolt of cloth. The stable boy offers to muck out extra stalls in exchange for a lump of stale butter. Even the queen, usually above such matters, quietly accepts a loaf of coarse bread from a gardener, thanking him with a courtesy more genuine than any she's given at court. When the bishop's men arrive with a small wheel of cheese, a tithe from the cathedral's dwindling stores, the king hosts a miniature feast. For an hour, there's real laughter, real relief. But as soon as the last crumb is gone, the hunger returns, heavier than before. Every day, you see the cost noble children grow sullen and listless, too tired for lessons or games. Young men, once proud and preening, now walk the halls with loose belts and haunted eyes. The youngest princess cries at night, her dreams full of roasted lamb and honey cakes. Even the king's horses, symbols of royal might, are fed less and less, their coats growing dull and their ribs standing out. The old boundaries between upstairs and downstairs dissolve. Servants, desperate and exhausted, sneak into the nobles' rooms at night, not to steal gold, but to search for forgotten biscuits or crumbs. You hear of a lady's maid who trades a family heirloom, a brooch shaped like a falcon for a handful of dried beans. A butler, caught pocketing a slice of stale cake, is quietly dismissed, but no one blames him. The palace's great silver platters are polished to gleaming, then left empty on the tables, a mocking reminder of better times. Rumours swirl in the hallways. Some say the king has sent secret envoys to distant lands, Italy, Flanders, even the lands of old enemies, offering jewels and promises in exchange for grain. Others claim that the queen is hiding food in her private rooms, sneaking it to her favourites. There's even a wild story that the king has begun meeting secretly with the head cook, planning how to ration the royal stores if things get worse. No one knows the truth, but everyone feels the tension. Outside, the city is restless. People gather outside the palace gates, hoping for charity, sometimes shouting angry curses. The royal guards, weakened and thin themselves, keep watch with weary eyes. At night, the distant glow of bonfires marks the camps of beggars, outcasts and would-be rebels. From the windows you watch as groups of children prowl the alleys, searching for scraps. Inside, even the royal chapel is transformed. Once it echoed with music and prayer. Now it's a place where nobles and servants alike huddle to warm their hands over thin candles and pray, not for salvation but for supper. The bishop preaches patience, but his sermons grow shorter as the pews thin out. One night, you see a knight kneeling at the altar, not in piety, but in exhaustion. Even God, it seems, is running out of comfort. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, the old courtly games return. Music in the great hall, a half-hearted attempt at dancing, a storytelling contest with prizes of dried fruit or a single almond. These are brief respites. Mostly the games end in tears or arguments, as hunger sharpens tempers. The jester, whose duty it is to make the king laugh, starts telling tales about the Great Turnip Rebellion and Sir Parsnip's quest for a real supper. His audience is grateful, but no one is fooled. By late autumn, illness creeps in. Cold rooms, scant food, and weak bodies breed fevers and coughs. A noble child dies quietly in the night, and the household mourns. But it is a strange, numb grief, the kind that comes from having no reserves left. Not even for sorrow, the king attends the funeral in silence, clutching the child's favourite toy, a wooden horse, painted bright but worn. You watch his shoulders sag, his crown suddenly too heavy. The queen writes letters to distant relatives, hoping for help. The answers are polite, full of condolences, but always the same. We too are suffering. Even the king's oldest friend, a duke from the north, sends only a small parcel of dried apples and a note. This is all I can spare. The sense of abandonment is palpable. As winter approaches, the palace grows colder still. Tapestries are taken down, cut into cloaks and blankets. The fireplaces burn low. Wood is as precious as bread. You see nobles and servants alike crowding around a single flame, hands outstretched, sharing body heat. The youngest prince, shivering, tells a story about a dragon made of ice that eats whole villages. The older children listen with wide eyes, clutching each other in the darkness. One afternoon, a miracle, or so it seems. The steward discovers a forgotten barrel of salted fish, hidden behind crates in the cellar. There's a flurry of excitement, a brief feeling of hope, but when the barrel is opened, the fish are spoiled, crawling with maggots. The kitchen staff tries to salvage what they can, but the smell drives even the hungriest away. The court jokes about courtly maggot pie, but the laughter is hollow. The king, worn and gaunt, gathers his family and closest advisers for a council by candlelight. His voice is quiet, his words slow. "We have lost much," he says, "but we will not lose hope. We will endure, together, until the fields return." There's no grand speech, no bold plan, just the simple, weary truth of survival. You sense that in this moment, the royal family is closer to their people than ever before. As the meeting ends, you find yourself outside, watching the sky. Snow begins to fall, covering the palace and the city in a cold, clean hush. For a moment, the world is beautiful again, the hunger and the fear softened by the gentle drift of wine. You pull your cloak tighter, knowing the worst is yet to come, but also that the kingdom endures not through feasts or riches, but through the stubborn, aching hope that one day the kitchens will be full again. Tonight, the noble kitchens are silent, but somewhere in the darkness, a child laughs, a mother sings, and the promise of spring still lingers, faint but unbroken. Down in the main hall, torches sputter and shadows crawl along the bare stone. The king stands at the center of a desperate council, his face pinched, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. All around him, courtiers and lords, hungry and hollow-eyed, lean in to hear what comes next. Food is running out, servants have vanished, and even the palace cats are getting nervous glances from the kitchen staff. When a kingdom starves, there are no heroes, only those who last a little longer than the rest. This is the moment when promises are minted like coins in a dying treasury. You see the king, once proud, now almost pleading, list the gifts he'll bestow on any peasant, any village willing to bring bread to the royal door. Pardons for old taxes, a silver coin for every sack of grain, the right to gather wood in the royal forests, freedom from conscription, a plot of land, even a personal handshake with His Majesty himself. "Bring what you can and the crown will remember you," he says, voice echoing off the rafters. If desperation had a sound, it would be this. The councillors nod, but you see the doubt flickering in their faces. These are the same men who last year threatened death for those who dared poach a rabbit on royal land. Now they speak of mercy and generosity, as if kindness alone could conjure a feast from thin air. Still, the king's scribe rushes to make notes, sealing the new edicts of charity with trembling hands. Messengers are dispatched before dawn to every corner of the realm, riding out with letters that promise more than any king has ever delivered. Word travels fast. In the villages, the royal heralds are met, not with cheers but with cautious, calculating silence. You join a crowd in a thatched square as the latest decree is read aloud, promising land, gold, and even noble titles for those who save the crown from hunger. An old woman squints at the parchment, then spits in the dirt. "He'll forget soon as he's fed," she mutters. The headman, less cynical, wonders aloud if it's true. Will the king really pardon our debts, or is it another trick? The peasants' faces are hard, their arms crossed. They've heard promises before, but the king's words are not entirely empty. Here and there, acts of generosity do happen. You see a small hamlet, its stores carefully rationed, decide to send 3 sacks of grain to the palace, not out of love for the king, but out of hope for reward. They tie their best horse to the cart and send their youngest son as an envoy. When he returns weeks later, he brings a royal letter, A handful of silver, and a story of feasting that sounds like a fable. The family eats for a month, but their neighbors whisper about whether it was worth it, about whether next year's seeds have been given away for nothing. Meanwhile, in another village, a cunning peasant tries to play the system. He scrapes together a barrel of last year's barley, sends it off with a prayer, and claims the king's promised land for himself. When the royal official comes to inspect, he finds only a patch of swamp and a broken fence. A gift is a gift, the peasant insists, pocketing the deed. Not all the king's bargains are noble. Hunger makes clever men of all sorts. The city markets become places of both hope and treachery. In one corner, a noble woman trades her pearl necklace for a single bag of flour. In another, a squire bargains for dried beans, offering his family crest as surety. The palace itself becomes a kind of marketplace. Envoys from the countryside arrive in droves, their wagons piled high with whatever they can spare or scrape together. Some bring half-spoiled onions, others a crate of apples gone soft and brown. A few arrive empty-handed, hoping the promise alone will earn them mercy. Inside the great hall, the king receives them all, standing in a faded robe, his crown askew, trying to look regal and grateful at once. He shakes hands, offers blessings, and true to his word, signs pardons and grants privileges. It is a parade of small miracles, but every gift given out is a reminder of how much more is needed. For every basket of turnips, 10 families still go hungry. There are scenes that would have been unthinkable a year ago. A barefoot farmer, hat in hand, stands face to face with the king, refusing to bow. "Your Majesty, this is what's left," he says, laying out a handful of shriveled carrots and a slab of hard cheese. The king thanks him, asks after his children, and promises protection from the bailiffs. The farmer leaves, unmoved. In the corridor, he tells you, words fill the air, but not the stomach. Some, sensing the shifting tides, try to bargain. A miller, clever and bold, offers his whole store of rye in exchange for a noble title. The king laughs, weary but game, and agrees. The next day, the miller's family eats well, until the envious neighbors accuse him of betrayal. Old grudges and new alliances form overnight, the lines between loyalty and survival blurred beyond recognition. In the castle kitchens, there is a brief, almost festive flurry. For the first time in weeks, pots bubble and pans sizzle. The cooks throw themselves into their work, coaxing flavor from the scarcest scraps. One creates a noble stew, roots, wild herbs, and a single smoked ham, boiled to grayness. It is served with ceremony, but eaten in silence, every spoonful counted. Even so, for a single night, laughter returns, and hope feels like something more than a rumor. But the celebrations are short-lived. As soon as the food is gone, the bargaining resumes. The king's new promises, handed out in desperation, begin to strain the old order. The lords and knights mutter among themselves. "He's giving away the kingdom to beggars," says one, clutching his empty purse. "If this goes on, there'll be no titles left, no lands, no law but hunger." They are not wrong. Each deal, each pardon, each grant of land to a peasant or a tradesman chips away at the foundation of noble power. The king, for all his titles, is trading authority for bread. The courtiers, once quick to boast of their royal favor, now look on with suspicion and envy. Some try to undermine the bargains, spreading rumors that the king's word is worth nothing, that the next ruler will undo it all. Others, seeing the tide turning, try to ingratiate themselves with the rising stars, befriending successful peasants, marrying into families with food to spare. The Game of Thrones has become a game of crumbs. At the edge of the city, you watch a procession of villagers marching toward the palace, singing songs of protest and hope. They carry banners made from old cloaks and brooms, their slogans painted in mud. "Feed the people, save the king, bread for all, not just the crown." It's part festival, part warning. The guards too weak to do much more than watch. Let them pass. Inside, the king listens as their voices echo through the halls, uncertain whether to feel gratitude or dread. You slip into the kitchens, where a group of palace servants is sharing the last loaf of black bread. They talk of the bargains struck, the debts forgiven, the dreams of land and freedom that seemed suddenly possible. "If the king keeps his word," says one, Maybe we'll all be lords, another laughs. Or maybe we'll all be beggars together. The hope is real, but so is the fear. No one knows how this new world will settle. Late at night you find the king alone in his study, staring at a map of his shrinking realm. He rubs his temples, muttering about debts and promises. What is a king without land? He asks the darkness. What is a crown worth when there's no one left to serve? The candle gut, he doesn't have the answer. Neither do you. Beyond the palace walls, the fields remain muddy and bare. The peasants, uncertain but emboldened, begin to gather in secret. They form councils, share stories, plot futures that don't depend on the whims of a starving monarch. Some dream of freedom, some of revenge, most just want a full belly and a safe home. You realize that, for the first time in living memory, the future is up for grabs. Dawn breaks over a kingdom transformed. The king's wild promises hang in the air, as heavy as the hunger that lingers in every home. You sense that nothing will ever be the same. Not for the palace, not for the fields, not for the children who have learned that even crowns must beg when famine comes to call. You wake before sunrise, cold and hungry, to rumours swirling through the servants' quarters and winding their way through even the highest halls. Cannibalism. No one says the word outright. Not at first, but you catch the whispers, sharp as winter wind. Did you hear about the cottage near the woods? 3 children, all vanished. A bone in the ashes. These are stories you might expect in fairy tales or nightmares, not in the shadow of the king's own castle. But famine, you quickly learn, will drive the most civilized soul into savage territory. Breakfast is a cruel joke. The kitchen offers a single boiled carrot and some gritty water, and the conversation is thin. Jokes, when they come, are nervous and forced. Maybe we'll stew the furniture next. Is that the jester's thumb in the soup? But laughter is a form of defense. The reality is that bellies are shrinking and tempers are growing short. Hunger is the great leveler. Even the highborn are plagued by terrible dreams. Tables laden with food that vanish as soon as you reach for them. Feasts that turn to ashes. Dinners where you are both host and main course. You slip out into the streets, where the real struggle plays out. In the city, neighbours who once shared bread now eye each other with suspicion. There are fights over scraps, arguments at the market, sudden silences when a stranger approaches. The children are the worst off, their faces pale and belly swollen. Some go missing, slipping away in the dark to scavenge for something, anything, along the city's edge. Sometimes they return, sometimes they do. Rumours travel fastest through the poorest quarters, but they reach the palace soon enough. The king's council debates the issue, some arguing for stricter control, others begging for mercy. The bishop preaches about the valley of the shadow, warning that God sees every crime, even in darkness. But faith is tested by hunger, and prayers do little to fill the larder. You hear that in one outlying village, a family was caught boiling bones. No one dares ask whose. Another tale tells of a widow who disappeared, leaving only a blood-stained apron behind. These stories slither from lip to lip, growing bolder with each retelling. The peasants are not the only ones afraid. In the great hall, the queen forbids her children from playing outside. Guards are posted at every door, not to keep out thieves, but to prevent anyone from sneaking away at night. Desperate enough to do the unthinkable, you witness a nobleman weeping in the chapel, clutching his son and begging God not to let their family fall into that shame. Starvation is no respecter of class. Fear eats at everyone. Meanwhile, the markets have changed. Gone are the days of bustling stalls and loud haggling. The few vendors who remain hawk codments, tree bark, fish bones, tattered roots at exorbitant prices. Gold means little now. You watch a woman trade her wedding ring for a handful of dried beans, her hands shaking as she passes them to her children. In the shadows of the alleys, darker business flourishes. You catch sight of a man in a tattered cloak, offering meat pies with no questions asked. The price is steep, but those who are desperate enough don't ask what's inside. As dusk falls, the city shrinks in on itself. Doors are bolted, windows shuttered. You walk the streets hearing the distant sound of weeping, the low murmur of prayers, and sometimes a terrible silence where laughter once lived. You stumble on a gathering outside a boarded-up inn, where people debate what's become of the vanished landlord. He owed the butcher, someone mutters. And now he's gone. There's no laughter this time. Within the palace, paranoia festers. Servants are searched before and after every shift. The cook, desperate to maintain order, posts guards at the pantry. What little remains is measured out by the spoonful. A rumour spreads that a rat has been caught and roasted by the footman. You find the bones hidden behind a tapestry. No one dares to punish them. Hunger has replaced justice. Desperation seeps into every interaction. In the lower kitchens, a scullery maid breaks down, confessing that she stole a crust of bread meant for the princess. The kitchen mistress, instead of punishing her, hugs the girl, both weeping for the world they've lost. Upstairs you find a baroness once famed for her beauty, gnawing on a leather glove. She laughs when you catch her. I thought it might taste of adventure, she jokes, her lips cracked. You say nothing, unwilling to name the thing that hangs between you. The king tries to restore order, sending more guards into the city, and promising harsh penalties for anyone caught in unthinkable acts. But everyone knows that hunger answers to no law. Even the city watch, gaunt and desperate, are rumoured to have turned a blind eye, or worse, to have bartered in flesh themselves. A sense of unreality grows. You start to wonder, is this what the end of the world looks like? Not fire or sword, but empty bellies and vanished neighbours. Sometimes a little black humour is all that keeps people sane. The jester invents a new song. Who will eat the king when there's nothing left? The courtiers laugh, but it is a nervous, hollow sound. Someone starts a contest. Who can name the worst meal they've eaten this month? The answers range from bark soup to fried shoe leather. You're almost relieved that nobody claims anything worse. Almost. But at night, you dream. You dream of feasts, of warmth, of safety. Then the images darken, the tables become gallows, and the only thing served is fear. One morning, you rise to a new scandal. A body found in the stables, gnawed clean. The official word is wolves, but everyone knows the truth. The palace is gripped by a kind of collective madness, suspicion blooming like mould on the walls. The queen takes to sleeping with a dagger under her pillow. The king doubles the guards. Yet somehow it only makes the hunger grow more monstrous. And then a shift. As winter loosens its hold, a weak sun breaks through the clouds for the first time in months. The air, still heavy, carries a hint of earth rather than rot. People emerge, blinking, haggard but alive. The bishop proclaims a day of fasting and atonement, hoping to stave off the last horrors. It is both too little and too late. But the gesture matters. Hope, that old liar, stirs in the hearts of even the most broken. In the villages, as the snow melts, you hear of neighbours sharing their last stores with the weakest. A midwife, known for her sharp tongue, risks her life to save a dying child. In the city, strangers band together to guard the public wells and distribute whatever can be found. Desperation makes monsters. Yes, but it can also make heroes. Still, the scars remain. Even as the fields begin to thaw, everyone watches each other with wary eyes. Trust is not easily mended. In the palace, the king decrees new punishments for any inhuman crimes, but you can see in his face that he is haunted by what has happened. There are fewer jokes now, fewer stories, but the silence is tinged with resolve. Before the famine, you might have scoffed at such stories, dismissing them as legend or slander. Now, having walked among the desperate, you understand, hunger changes everything. It is the test no king, no peasant, no mother or child is ever truly prepared for. In the end, all you can do is hope the thaw comes before the last boundary is crossed. As spring approaches, the markets slowly refill, not with plenty, but with promise. People trade bulbs and seeds, bits of dried fish, and sometimes forgiveness. The bishop declares the famine over, though the hunger will linger for years in the bones of those who survived. And you changed, cautious, forever marked, step out into a world that feels both new and old. You look at your neighbours, at the king, at the silent, wounded city, and know that beneath every polite greeting, every handshake, there is a memory of just how far people will go to live. If you wander toward the heart of the city, You find yourself drawn to the clang of church bells and the rising smoke of incense. In a famine, when food and hope are both scarce, it's faith that most people turn to, even if it's faith with a slightly desperate edge. This morning the bells seem to ring longer and louder than usual, echoing through muddy streets and into the hungriest corners of the palace and peasant hut alike. You join the slow-moving procession heading for the cathedral, a ragtag parade of hollow-eyed nobles, city folk and shivering peasants, all clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, prayer can fill a stomach. Inside, the cathedral is cold and draughty, but packed with bodies. The air shimmers with candlelight and the thick scent of melting wax. Every pew is full, every pillar shadowed by silent supplicants. You squeeze into a corner, standing behind a noblewoman who looks so gaunt that her fur-lined cloak hangs from her bones like drapery. The bishop stands before the altar, his vestments splendid, though you know even he has had to pawn his silver ring for food. His face is pale and determined. This is not the easy, gentle faith of ordinary times. This is a plea for survival. He lifts his arms. "Pray for rain, for sun, for mercy," he cries, his voice surprisingly strong. "Pray for forgiveness for whatever brought this upon us, our greed, our pride, our neglect of the poor. Pray for deliverance from hunger and despair." The crowd responds with a groan of amains and sniffles, some crossing themselves, some simply bowing their heads. The choir begins to sing, voices trembling but beautiful, the Latin words rolling up to the vaulted ceiling and out into the grey morning. You watch as the rituals unfold, incense swinging in smoky arcs, acolytes with thin faces lighting candles for the souls of the dead and the living alike. Some nobles make showy donations at the altar, rings, a gold pin, a jeweled comb, but most people have nothing left to give but whispered prayers. You see a mother, kneeling with her son, his ribs poking out from his tunic, hands clasped so tightly they're white. "Please," she murmurs, "just let him live through spring." The boy stares up at the stained glass, where saints feed the multitudes with miraculous loaves and fishes. He knows those stories, but so far, no miracles have come. The king and queen arrive with little ceremony, flanked by tired guards. The king's face is drawn, his eyes sunken, his crown almost a burden. He kneels, no fanfare, no royal prayers, just a father begging for the survival of his family and kingdom. You're surprised by the sight. It's rare for royalty to display need so openly, but even the highest have learned humility in these lean months. When the prayers are over, the bishop calls for a procession. The whole city spills out onto the streets. Nobles, priests, children, beggars, even the palace jester, trailing along with a bell and a bag for alms. The cross is carried at the front, followed by relics, bones of saints, a chipped chalice, a scrap of cloth said to be holy. Behind them shuffle the hungry masses, singing hymns and calling for the clouds to part. At the city gates they kneel in the mud and plead for divine intervention. It isn't just the city. Out in the countryside, every village church is crammed. Peasants trudge for miles, some carrying small offerings, a few onions, a sprig of dried rosemary, a single withered apple, to lay on the altar in exchange for blessings. The priests urge fasting, though the irony is lost on no one. Most have been fasting for months already, whether by choice or necessity. Despite the outpouring of faith, the weather refuses to change. You watch as the sky stays stubbornly grey, the air damp and heavy. The river runs high and brown, fields remain soggy, and what little grain pokes up is thin and pale. There's a mood of mounting frustration. "Maybe God has gone deaf," you hear someone mutter. Others grumble about the bishop's fancy meals, unaware that his table is just as bare. Yet, faith persists, sometimes in unexpected ways. You see little acts of mercy everywhere. A baker, down to his last bit of flour, sneaking a roll to a starving child. A priest splitting his own meagre ration with a beggar at the door. Neighbors pooling their last onions for a thin soup. These gestures are small, but they matter. You start to think that maybe the prayers do work, not as magic from above, but as reminders of what it means to share. The palace isn't immune to the power of ritual, either. Each day the Queen orders the royal chapel open to all. and the court gathers for prayers. She leads them in hymns, her voice soft but steady, the sound echoing off the empty pews. The king, for his part, has taken to making rounds of the sickbeds, offering a word of comfort or a blanket when he can spare it. The royal children help tend the palace garden, pulling weeds and planting what seeds remain, their laughter oddly reassuring in the gloom. But as hope fades with each fruitless procession, so does patience. In one village, after a particularly bitter sermon, the crowd turns on the priest, accusing him of hoarding church grain. A fight breaks out, and the altar is overturned. You arrive as the dust settles, seeing the priest weeping in the ruins of his church. Later he's forgiven, but the sense of community is damaged. Even God's house is hungry now. Someone sighs. Rumors of miracles spark briefly and die out. Someone claims a statue of the Virgin wept tears, really just rain leaking through the roof. Another swears a loaf of bread multiplied on the altar, but it turns out to be sleight of hand. People want to believe, but faith can't fill bellies forever. As the weeks drag on, processions grow smaller, voices more hoarse, hymns less joyful. One morning, the bishop decrees a great fast for rain. Everyone, noble, merchant, peasant, is to eat nothing for 2 days and nights in hopes that heaven will finally relent. You're there as the city struggles through it. Some people faint in the streets, others gather in secret to share whatever they can. By the end of the fast, the only rain is the kind that falls from tearful eyes. Yet, for all the disappointment, faith refuses to die. You see it in the old woman clutching her rosary, in the child drawing pictures of bread and sunlight, in the soldier who kneels for an extra moment after everyone else has gone. Even the palace jester, thin as a rake, finds a way to turn hope into laughter. Maybe God is just waiting for us to learn to bake our own miracles, he jokes, earning a rare smile from the queen. In the end, prayer does not bring the rains, but it does something else. It binds the hungry, the fearful, and the grieving together. It reminds everyone, from the king in his tattered velvet to the beggar in the gutter, that survival is a communal effort. In the echoing silence after the final hymn, you realize this is the real miracle. Not bread falling from the sky, but hands reaching out to share what little they have. And so, with the memory of candles burning in the cathedral and the taste of hope lingering in every empty bowl, you return to your cold room. Hunger hasn't left you, but it feels a little less cruel, knowing that at least you're not alone. If you thought the city markets were once lively, crammed with peddlers, laughter, and bargaining, think again. Now the markets are places of misery and shame, their mud-churned squares lined with gaunt faces and desperate eyes. Yet in famine, commerce does not die, it mutates, as everything does, adapting to the world's new rules. This is the age of the markets of despair, where hunger makes every exchange a matter of survival, and shame is traded for bread. It's early morning when you push through the battered gate, stepping around a puddle the colour of weak tea. The stalls are not empty, but their wares have changed. Instead of baskets overflowing with pears and apples, you see a scattering of withered roots, shriveled onions, and scraps of meat, more bone than flesh. The vendors, once proud of their bounty, now hawk their meagre goods in whispers, too embarrassed to shout. The noble families, once above such public dealings, have joined the crowd. You watch a count's daughter, her velvet gown hidden beneath a coarse shawl, trying to exchange a brooch for a loaf of stale bread. The baker eyes the jewel with suspicion. What good is gold to a hungry man, he mutters, but relents when her father steps forward, clutching a signet ring. For the first time, the nobility must bargain like commoners, humbled by the knowledge that their titles mean nothing to an empty stomach. Nearby you spot a knight haggling with a farmer over a sack of grain, offering his battered sword as collateral. "I'll reclaim it when the fields recover," he promises. But both men know there are no guarantees. Two boys, eyes hollow, trade a sack of old walnuts for a pair of tattered boots. At least boots can walk you to another village, maybe one with more luck. Everywhere, silver and silk are exchanged for crusts, scraps, and hope. Then there's the new breed of merchant. Those who specialize in desperation. Black-clad, eyes darting, they buy up what little food remains, hoarding it until prices rise still higher. You hear whispers, He bought a farmer's last chicken for a copper, sold it for 10. She traded bread for secrets, then sold the secrets to the king's men. In every corner, some new racket flourishes, false miracle cures, fraudulent grain, even the rumor of human flesh sold to those too far gone to care. The old market laws are gone, scales are rigged, coinage debased, contracts broken. The city guard, once strict about weights and measures, now turns a blind eye, sometimes even joining the game. You watch as a captain pockets a wedge of cheese, promising to keep order in exchange. Justice, like everything else, is for sale. At the edge of the market, a small crowd gathers around a noblewoman selling family heirlooms, a candelabra, a prayer book, an ivory comb, for flour or beans, she pleads. Her eyes wild. No one steps forward at first. Then an old woman offers a handful of chestnuts, and the deal is struck. The noblewoman weeps, clutching her prize. You feel a strange sense of shame watching the transaction. Once she would have thrown you out for muddy boots. Now she would trade a pearl for a crust. Children swarm through the stalls, hands outstretched. Some offer songs or stories for a bite of food. Others simply beg, too weak for pride. A girl with tangled hair carries a basket of dandelion greens. She says her mother is sick, her brother dying. The baker gives her a hunk of bread, waving away payment. Next time, he says, bring a song. You realize that in famine, charity is a currency too, and sometimes the most precious. Yet, not all is bleakness. Amid the misery, you glimpse flashes of solidarity. Peasants pull their scraps for a communal stew, eaten in silence but shared with anyone who asks. A merchant, grown rich on misery, leaves a basket of bread by the church. No note, no explanation. You wonder if shame is catching up to him, or if hunger has taught even the hardest hearts to soften. You slip past the market square and into a back alley where the truly desperate barter. Here, debts are settled not in coin, but in favours. Watch my child, and I'll give you a turnip. Help me bury my mother, and I'll share a cup of broth. Old enemies call uneasy truces. Former rivals share secrets and warnings about the city watch. The bonds of survival remake the world, link by link. In the palace, the king is not blind to these changes. He sends envoys to buy food at any price, offering gold, jewels, even promises of noble favour. But the markets know their worth, and the king's treasure is no longer enough. At the royal gates, courtiers return with empty baskets and lowered eyes. The king grows thinner, his temper shorter. The queen begins selling her own trinkets, combs, earrings, even a wedding gift from a distant cousin for a little barley, a handful of apples. Once, the court mocked the merchants and hucksters who ran the city's black markets. Now, those same traders are invited into the palace kitchens, paid handsomely for their goods, trusted with royal secrets. Rumor has it that the master of the kitchens keeps a secret list of favored suppliers, smugglers, bandits, even pirates who sneak food into the city by night. When the king complains about the quality, the cook shrugs. If your majesty wishes better, perhaps your majesty would like to grow his own potatoes. Some courtiers try to cheat the new system, forging receipts or bribing market officials. When one lord is caught passing off sacks of sand as flour, he is paraded through the square, mocked by the same crowd that once bowed before him. The lesson is not lost on anyone. In famine, shame is for the hungry, but justice is for the clever. You wander through the market. As dusk falls, torches gutter, shadows stretch. The crowd thins, but the sense of hunger lingers. Two boys fight over a rotten apple until an old man intervenes, cutting it in half and giving each a share. A young woman sits on a crate, cradling a sick child, selling off her last possessions, a doll, a scarf, a single earring. You want to look away, but you cannot. In a corner, a priest blesses a pile of potatoes, murmuring a prayer for a better tomorrow. His flock listens, faces blank but hopeful. Nearby, the jester offers fortune-telling for a crust of bread. His predictions are always the same. The rain will end, the sun will return, and you'll eat your fill, just not today. For a moment the laughter is real. As night settles over the city, You make your way back to the palace, pockets empty, heart heavy. The markets of despair have become the new heart of the kingdom, places of cruelty and kindness, shame and solidarity, where every transaction is a gamble and every bite a victory. You realize that the world has changed. The old rules have vanished, replaced by hunger's law. But as you pass the final stall, you see something that gives you hope. A baker, having sold his last loaf, kneels and shares a crust with a beggar. They eat together, not as lord and vassal, but as two hungry souls. In the end, maybe this is what the famine teaches. When all else is gone, sometimes all you can do is share your last crumb and wait for the dawn. You wake one morning to a rumor running wild. A village not far from the city has done the unthinkable. Instead of cowering and begging, its peasants have taken up arms and marched to the lord's granary. At first the tale is whispered in dark corners. They broke the lot, they took the bread. They set fire to the manor. But by midday the city buzzes with a new kind of energy. Hunger breeds boldness. And now, boldness breeds rebellion. It starts with small things. A group of townsfolk, gaunt but determined, refuse to pay for a loaf of bread in the city market. The baker, himself desperate, shouts after them, but the crowd closes ranks. Someone throws a stone, another shoves the city watch, who hesitate should they defend the baker or side with the mob. The answer, today, is to look away. You slip through winding alleys, drawn to the commotion. In the main square, a crowd is gathering. Some are angry, waving sticks and old swords, others simply hungry, clutching children or holding empty baskets. At the front, a woman with fierce eyes lifts her baby above the crowd. Feed him, or bury us both. The words hit like thunder. For a heartbeat you see the city's fragile order teetering on the edge. Outside the city walls, similar scenes unfold. Peasants, having heard of the village rebellion, begin to gather. You follow a band of them as they move through fields and woods. Faces grim with determination, they march not with the discipline of soldiers, but with the desperation of the starving. When they reach the granary, they do not beg. They break down the doors. Inside, sacks of barley and wheat tumble out. For a moment there is chaos. Fists fly. Shouts echo. But soon the villagers are dividing the spoils with rough communal fairness. Back at the manor, the local lord stands in disbelief. His retainers scattered. "This has never happened," he whispers, eyes wide. You see him try to rally his remaining guards, but even they hesitate. "You go hungry too," one tells him. The lord falters, and for the first time he sees fear in the eyes of his own men. The fire comes next. The peasants, emboldened by their victory, set torch to the outbuildings, barns, storage sheds, even the edges of the manor itself. Flames leap into the night, illuminating faces, both joyous and terrified. Some shout for justice. Others simply stare at the inferno, mouths agape. You feel a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. The world is turning upside down. News spreads fast. By noon the next day, other villages are following suit. You watch as a second manor is stormed, its lord fleeing into the woods. In one town, the people seize the granary, then march together to the castle. The garrison, outnumbered and half-starved, surrenders without a fight. Food is divided among the people, and for the first time in months, the sound of laughter, real laughter, echoes across the fields. In the city, the king's advisors gather in panic. "It's an uprising," they shout. "We must restore order, but how?" The palace guard is weak, many having deserted to join their families in the countryside. The city watch are just as hungry as the rebels. The king calls for calm, promising justice and mercy, but his words sound hollow, even to his own court. In private he curses his fate. "Once I ruled with a word, now I beg with an empty hand." You find yourself drawn to the front lines. In the villages, you witness old scores settled and new alliances forged. A local bully, once the lord's favourite, is put to work distributing bread. The village priest, torn between loyalty to the manor and compassion for his flock, chooses the latter, blessing the food as it is handed out. Even the old, the sick, and the outcasts are included. Nobody is forgotten, at least for now. Yet the violence is not without cost. You see a barn set ablaze with a family trapped inside, victims of suspicion perhaps, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the chaos, some take advantage, looting what valuables remain. Old feuds flare up. In one village, the crowd turns on a wealthy merchant accused of hoarding. His house is ransacked, and his family flees. Justice in famine is as raw and unpredictable as hunger itself. Still, the mood changes. Where there was once despair, now there is possibility. You hear it in the voices of the rebels. We are not powerless. The land belongs to those who work it. If the king cannot feed us, why should he rule us? These are not just shouts in the heat of the moment. They are seeds, sown in the broken ground of the old order. The king, faced with crisis, makes a desperate gamble. He sends a message to the people: return to peace, and you will be pardoned. Bring your grievances to me, and I will listen. For the first time in living memory, villagers and townsfolk are summoned to the palace, not as supplicants, but as negotiators. The great hall, once a stage for royal decrees, becomes a forum for the hungry to speak. You watch as a delegation of peasants, sunburned, muddy, eyes bright with fear and hope, stand before the throne. Their spokesman, a blacksmith with massive hands, steps forward. We ask for justice, not mercy. We ask for bread, not promises. The king listens, brow furrowed, and for once he has no clever reply. In this moment, the peasants are his equals. In the aftermath, changes come quickly. The king issues new orders. Granaries are to be opened, food shared more equally. The harshest bailiffs and tax collectors are dismissed, replaced by men trusted by the people. The king's own store, what little remains, is divided among the hungry. These are concessions wrung from fear, not charity, but they matter. The old order, however, is slow to die. Some nobles, furious at the loss of their privilege, plot in secret. In one dark corner you overhear them. This cannot last. We must restore what was lost, but the balance has shifted. For every whisper of counterplot, there are 10 shouts for freedom from the streets. In the countryside, the peasants begin to organize. They form councils to manage the division of food and to keep order. Old village rivalries are set aside, if only for now, in favor of survival. You see blacksmiths and bakers, shepherds and seamstresses, all working side by side. It's a fragile peace, but it's real. Yet not all is resolved. Hunger, even when sated for a moment, leaves scars. The memories of violence, of neighbors turning on neighbors, linger. You pass a field where 2 families argue over the ownership of a plot of land, voices rising, fists clenched. The priest steps between them, urging peace, but his words carry less weight than before. The world is changing, and old solutions no longer suffice. Back in the city, the markets reflect the new reality. No longer are the stalls the domain of merchants and nobles alone. Peasants arrive with their own goods, setting prices, haggling openly. The lines between class and station blur. Gold is no longer king. Bread is a new economy, born of necessity and revolution, takes root. The palace itself adapts. The royal kitchens, once reserved for the nobility, are thrown open to the public twice a week. There are rules, no hoarding, no violence, but within the walls, people mingle as never before. You watch as a countess shares a bowl of soup with a stable boy, both equally gaunt, both grateful for the same small mercy. The king has changed too. He walks among his people more often, listening, asking questions, sometimes even helping to serve food. It's not humility exactly, it's survival. He knows his rule depends not on divine right, but on the goodwill of those who feed his table. Some call it the end of monarchy, others, the birth of a new kingdom. At night, you sit by the city walls and watch the stars emerge. The fires of rebellion burn low, but their glow lingers. The air is thick with stories of suffering, of courage, of justice won and lost. You realize the famine has done what no enemy could. It has united the kingdom in hunger and just maybe in hope. And so, with bread finally back in your belly and the sound of laughter on the breeze, you close your eyes and dream of a spring, where fields are green, granaries are full, and kings and peasants alike remember what it is to share. The air in the kingdom is shifting, but not for the better. When you step into the crowded lanes or cross the palace courtyard, you sense an invisible threat trailing after the hunger plague. It always comes on famine's heels, like an old friend answering an invitation, and now it's everywhere, in the hollow faces, the rasping coughs, the feverish whispers. Malnutrition, you quickly discover, is the mother of every illness. If you thought empty bellies were bad, wait until sickness settles in. It begins quietly. The city's healers are the first to notice. A boy comes to the apothecary with a rash that won't heal, a baker collapses in the street, a monk is found shivering in his cell. Despite the thickest robe, you pass a line of the sick outside the church waiting for blessings and bread, sometimes all at once. The bishop sprinkles holy water, but even faith is thin these days. In the palace, the mood sours. The queen's maid falls ill and dies within a week. A knight is stricken at dinner, and within days, half the royal table is coughing into their sleeves. The air is poisoned, some whisper. Others claim it's punishment for the recent riots, for greed, for hoarding. God is angry. The bishop's sermons take on a harder edge. "Repent," he bellows, or share the fate of the Israelites in the desert. But it's hard to listen when your throat is dry and your body aches. Outside, the city suffers. When food is scarce, people are forced to eat whatever they can. Rotten grain, spoiled meat, strange herbs picked from the ditches. This is a banquet for disease. You see it in the sunken eyes, the thin arms, the way people move as if they are wading through thick mud. Diarrhea and fever become common as bread. The doctors are helpless. Their cures onion poultices, vinegar washes, leeches, useless against hunger's twin plague. The nobles fare no better. You wander through their halls, where the scent of sickness overlays the perfume and incense. The king's own physician looks more worried by the day. He prescribes the usual rest, broth, clean water, but there is little of any to offer. When the youngest princess develops a rash and fever, the queen spends the night at her bedside, praying for a miracle that never comes. In the morning the princess is dead, and her nurse is coughing too. As the weeks wear on, bodies pile up. The graveyards fill, the churches overflow. In the villages, funerals become a daily ritual. The old, the very young, and the weakest go first. But soon, there's no clear pattern. Sometimes a strong farmer falls ill and is gone in days. Sometimes an ancient widow outlasts everyone. You see coffins lined up by the chapel, each one a grim marker of famine's reach. Desperation spawns superstition. Some blame witches, others foreigners. A few even blame the king himself. Rumors run wild. The bread was cursed. The river brings sickness. It's the rats they eat the dead. The city's rat catchers, suddenly in demand, charge double for their services. You pass a group of children chasing a rat down an alley, hopeful for meat or vengeance or both. Public health, such as it is, collapses. No one is strong enough to clean the streets, and waste piles up everywhere. The stench is overpowering, a rotting blend of old food, dead animals, and human misery. The king orders the streets swept, but the men who are well enough to work are too few and too frightened. The palace, for all its grandeur, is no cleaner than a peasant's hut. You step over a dead dog on the marble steps and see no one rush to remove it. Medicine turns to magic. The apothecaries sell charms, rosemary garlands, garlic necklaces, packets of dried herbs. Some wear amulets carved with prayers. Others paint crosses on their doors. The bishop organizes more processions, this time to ward off the pestilence. But the crowds are smaller now, and their singing is muted. You hear one priest murmur, "If only we could eat the incense, we'd have something to live for." Inside the palace, the king's council is divided. Some urge quarantine, shut the city gates, keep the sick within. Others, fearing revolt, urge mercy. The king, gaunt and exhausted, listens but cannot decide. In the end, the decision is made for him. Disease knows no gates. Even as the palace tries to close itself off, the plague slips in with a coughing guard, a cook's sickly child, a merchant's infected coin. There is nowhere left to hide. You pass through the city, bearing witness. At the river, bodies are floated downstream when graves are full. On the outskirts, Pyres burn night and day. There is a desperate efficiency to it now. No time for mourning, no energy for grief. The living do what they must. Wash the dead, dig the graves, move on. Even the dogs, once loyal and gentle, have grown thin and wild. Yet, in the midst of all this horror, you see moments of grace. A mother sits with her dying son, cradling him and singing lullabies from a time before hunger. A priest, risking infection, carries soup to the sick. The palace jester, pale but still smiling, visits the children's ward and makes them laugh just once before they fade. The human spirit, you realize, is stubborn. It refuses to die, even when the body is weak. The king walks among his people more now, his face uncovered, his sorrow plain to see. He speaks to the families of the dead, apologizes for what he cannot change. In one village, he kneels by the grave of a child, bowing his head in the mud. Some say this is humility, others call it despair. Either way, it matters. You see people weeping not just for their own loss, but for the king who has finally become one of them. As spring warms the land, the plague's grip loosens, but it does not vanish. The scars are everywhere: abandoned houses, empty fields, churches half full, yet life, stubborn as ever, returns. The fields, brown and wasted, begin to green. Children, fewer now but alive, chase after the first butterflies. The markets reopen, slowly, warily. The living count their blessings and their losses in equal measure. In the palace, hope is cautious. The queen tends a patch of early beans in the garden. The king works with the steward to distribute what food remains. A new ritual forms. Each week the palace bell rings to honor the dead, and then just as solemnly, the kitchens open to feed the living. There are no more rich or poor, only survivors. The old power of the crown has been humbled, and everyone knows it. You see it in the king's eyes, in the way the nobles now bow to the peasants who saved their lives, in the quiet strength of those who weathered both famine and plague. The kingdom has changed, bruised, but still standing. You find yourself sitting in the evening sunlight, exhausted, with a crust of bread in your lap and the faint sound of children playing somewhere nearby. The air smells clean again, if only for now, and as the sun sets over fields slowly coming back to life, you realize the worst has passed, not because of any miracle, but because so many refuse to give up. Even in the shadow of plague, the kingdom endures. Its people endure, and you, who have witnessed hunger and death, know that hope like grain can take root in the hardest ground. As the plague loosens its hold and the lost fires of rebellion cool, something new stirs in the kingdom's back alleys and shadowy crossroads, a market not of hope, but of cunning and risk. The law, battered by famine and disease, can barely keep pace with the hunger that remains. Out of the ruins rises a new breed of survivor. The black market king, the grain bandit, the thief with a conscience, or sometimes none at all. You first hear whispers of them in the city's narrowest lanes. A child with quick fingers slips a note into your palm. Bread tonight. Ask for greyleaf, corner of Candle Row. In the palace, the head cook speaks of shadowy figures who deliver flour by moonlight. Never seen, never named, paid in secrets as often as in silver. Even the king's steward admits, in a rare moment of candor, sometimes the best grain comes through the worst hands. You follow the trail one night, heart pounding, past shuttered windows and doorways thick with suspicion. At the edge of the old city wall you find a gathering, a circle of hungry faces and sharp eyes, bartering under the flicker of torchlight. Here, no one asks how food was found, only what it will cost. Smoked eels, black loaves, a few turnips, all are weighed and argued over like royal jewels. The grain kings stand apart, lords of this underworld, moving sacks of barley with the air of highwaymen. Some of these smugglers are folk heroes, legends already in their own time. There's Tol Marius, the ex-soldier who raids lordly stores and returns with wagons of wheat for the poor. Children chase his shadow through the alleys, chanting Tol Marius brings bread. Others are less noble, Black Gil, who'll trade a crust for a secret and a coin and cut your purse if you have neither. Not all are men. Old Anya, whose network of spies rivals the king's, moves eggs and cheese in baskets under her skirts, outwitting every patrol, for the desperate. The black market is both lifeline and danger. Peasants sneak out at night to buy a measure of rye, risking punishment if caught. A baker's apprentice loses a finger to a bandit's blade for refusing to share. In some towns, grain theft is punishable by hanging, but even the bailiffs look the other way when their own families are starving. Better a thief than a corpse, you hear an old farmer mutter. Yet these new networks don't only serve the poor. The palace itself is now a major customer. When the queen asks for honey, it's not the royal beekeepers who deliver, but a small girl with quick feet and a fearless grin. The king's personal physician, searching for herbs to fight fever, visits the black market in disguise, bartering rings for a pouch of dried mint. Sometimes the line between law and lawless is as thin as a soup broth. In the countryside, things are no less complicated. The roads are dangerous, roamed by bandits and armed bands. Some are little more than starving villagers, others former soldiers or mercenaries out for themselves. You travel with a grain convoy one evening, crouched low as torches bob in the distance. When the attack comes, it's swift and almost silent. Masked men slip from the woods, cut the wagon traces, and vanish with the goods. The local lord curses their boldness. But the next day, bread appears in a dozen nearby villages. You realize that not all thieves are the same. Hunger has redrawn the boundaries of sin and virtue. These grain bandits become folk tales almost overnight. Remember the night of 100 sacks? People whisper, recalling when a royal convoy was robbed and the grain scattered in the square for anyone to take. The king fumes. The nobles weep for their lost stores, but the people just this once go to bed with full bellies. Of course, not every raid is so bloodless. There are fights, betrayals, even killings. You witness a feud between two rival gangs that ends in a muddy brawl, broken teeth, and 2 bodies left in the river. Some blame the bandits for the chaos. Others see them as the last defense against hunger's return. The bishop preaches against those who steal in the dark, but you notice even he accepts a loaf delivered by unseen hands at midnight. Soon, the grain kings and black marketeers are not only surviving, but thriving. They build networks, coded messages sent through taverns and laundries, secret drop points in churchyards and ruins. A word from a trusted smuggler can save a village from hunger, or bring ruin to a greedy lord. Even the city guard, underpaid and half-starved, turn into silent partners, taking a cut in exchange for silence. In the midst of this, a new order begins to emerge. The palace, once hostile to any who broke its rules, now finds itself negotiating with outlaws. You watch the king receive a visit from a woman in plain dress, old Anya herself, bearing a gift of flour. She sits at his table, drinks his thin wine, and proposes a bargain. Let us trade openly, share the grain, and peace will return. Chase us, and there will be more riots. The king, to your astonishment, agrees. He signs a decree permitting limited market trading at night, so long as the palace takes a share. For the first time in months, the city sees bread on every table, even if just a little. The peasants, emboldened, travel to town to buy food without fear. The nobles grumble, but adapt. Some even start their own trading ventures, sending servants out to buy at night, pretending not to know the source. The line between criminal and merchant blurs until it almost disappears, but this uneasy peace comes at a cost. With the rise of black markets comes a wave of new crimes. You hear of false weights, food poisoned to remove rivals, entire wagons hijacked and sold elsewhere. Rumors swirl of a shadow court that tries thieves and traitors by moonlight. Its sentence is swift and final. There's even talk of a masked figure, a grain king or queen, whose word is law in the underworld. Some say she is kinder than the king, others that her justice is as ruthless as famine. Still, for all the danger, there's an undeniable resilience in the city. The people adapt. You watch a mother buy a handful of beans and trade half for a candle, then share what's left with her neighbor. Children invent new games, chasing shadows, mapping secret routes through alleys and rooftops, playing at being grain bandits or smugglers. Laughter, fragile but real, returns to the dusk. Even in the palace, the mood lightens. The kitchens, fed by new supplies, serve slightly richer fare. The king holds council with his advisors, now including representatives from the merchant class and, quietly, from the black market. The old lords grumble, but the kingdom is eating again. Let the old rules sleep, says the steward, so long as the bread rises. Yet beneath this fragile surface, you sense new dangers. Power is shifting. The grain kings grow bolder, the peasants more independent, the palace more reliant on those it once called criminal. You see alliances forming, bargains struck in shadow. The kingdom will never again be as it was. Hunger may have forced king and commoner alike to kneel, but it is cunning and risk that shape the world now. And as you watch the city breathe, alive, wary, forever changed, you realize the next story is already beginning. A story of power, born not from birth but from what a man or woman can offer when the world starves. In this new order, even a loaf of bread can crown a king. You wake to an impossible rumor. The king himself is coming to the village. No heralds, no armored retinue, no gold-embroidered banners, just the king, hungry, desperate, ready to do what his ancestors would have called unthinkable. The story runs ahead of him, whispered from cottage to cottage, met with disbelief, suspicion, even a little glee. Some say it's a trick or a test, others that the king has finally been brought low by hunger, just like everyone else. You stand at the edge of the village square as the sun struggles to rise. The air is cold, and the smoke from a dozen chimneys drifts low over thatched roofs. The earth is sodden, the puddles still edged with frost. You see the villagers gathering, curiosity outweighing caution. Old men lean on sticks, women clutch children, and a few boys hold stones, just in case this is not a royal plea, but a raid. You feel the tension in the air, part anticipation, part anxiety. Even in famine, respect for the crown is a fragile thing. At first it seems like a mistake. The king in a travel-stained cloak, boots caked with mud, a thin line of attendants behind him. His face is gaunt, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his bearing is still regal. Even if it's obvious that he hasn't eaten well in weeks, you can hardly believe it's really him. The village headman, caught between pride and panic, bows clumsily. The king nods, but he doesn't wait for ceremony. He speaks simply, his voice rougher than you expect. People of this village, I come not as your lord, but as your neighbor. My family hungers as yours do. If you have anything to spare, even the smallest gift, I will remember it. For a moment, no one knows how to react. It's as if the world has spun off its axis. A silence settles. So deep you hear a crow caw from the fields, a baby fuss from a cottage window. Then, to your surprise, a woman steps forward, hands shaking. She offers a single shriveled onion, placing it at the king's feet. It's all I have, sire, but it's honest. Another follows. A boy brings a cracked egg, an old man, a handful of beans. One by one, they add to the pile, each gift humble, but real. The king thanks each of them personally, eyes meeting theirs, voice full of gratitude. You see him bow to the children, kneel to accept a crust of bread from a widow. He asks about their fields, their health, even their dreams for the coming spring. The villagers are stunned, some are moved to tears. The old headman, wiping his eyes, mutters, I never thought I'd see the day. But not everyone is so generous. There are mutters from the back. Where was he last year, when the soldiers took our grain? We should have him plough the fields. See how he likes it. One man, gaunt and bitter, turns his back, refusing to offer even a root. The king, for his part, does not scold. He listens, nods, and moves on. What follows is a scene you will never forget. The king sits with the villagers around the community fire. He shares a meal of broth and hard bread, no royal food but shared by all. Children gather close, fascinated by his stories of the palace, his memories of better harvests. The king asks their names, their hopes, even what games they play. In this moment, the gulf between king and commoner closes. Hunger, you realize, is the great equalizer. That night, the king is offered a bed in the headman's cottage. It's little more than straw, but he accepts with thanks, refusing the offer of more than a single blanket. In the darkness, you overhear him talking softly with the villagers. If ever I forget this night, may I never wear the crown again. It's not a proclamation, it's a promise. You believe him. The next morning, as the king prepares to leave, The villagers gather to bid him farewell. A girl offers a posy of dried flowers, a charm against bad luck. The king, clearly moved, promises to return. When the rains come and the fields are green, I will visit again, and eat what you eat, drink what you drink. He leaves, but the mark of his visit lingers. You feel it in the way people look at each other. Less suspicion, more hope. Word spreads quickly. By week's end, other villages receive visits, not just from the king, but from nobles and stewards sent to listen, to beg, to make amends. Not every journey is so humble, not every village so forgiving. In some places, the king is jeered, even threatened. In others, people offer all they have. Across the land, the act of royal begging becomes both symbol and spark, a sign that even the highest must bow to hunger. You see the effect everywhere. In the city, the mood is transformed. The sight of the king on foot, without finery, inspires both pity and pride. Merchants, moved by the stories, loosen their grip on hoarded goods. The cathedral hosts a shared supper for the poorest, funded by nobles who would have once considered such charity beneath them. The queen herself is seen tending the palace garden, handing out roots and greens to children from the slums. But this new humility is not without its dangers. The king's rivals, nobles jealous of their own dignity, begin to grumble. What good is a king who begs? They sneer. Some accuse him of weakness, others of showmanship. A plot simmers to restore the old order, but for now the people's respect is with the king. You witness small acts of kindness blooming in unexpected places. A nobleman who once sneered at the common rabble opens his stores to his tenants. The city guard, having watched the king's example, starts sharing their rations. In the countryside, the old system of tithes and taxes is quietly suspended, at least until the next harvest. In the palace, you hear stories of change. The king's council meetings are open to representatives from towns and villages. Voices that were once silenced now speak with cautious hope. The old laws are not swept away, but new ones begin to form. Rules for fair trade, for food distribution, for debt forgiveness. The king's word, once distant, is now weighed against the needs of his people. Yet, for all this, hunger still rules. The fields remain bare, the granaries low, but the sense of isolation of every man and woman fending for themselves has weakened. The king's visit, symbolic as it is, has reminded the realm that everyone is in this together. As spring approaches, you see a strange sight. A parade of villagers arriving at the palace gates, bearing gifts of their own roots, cheese, even a caged hen. They come not to pay taxes, but to share what little they have. The palace kitchens, for the first time in months, fill with the smell of baking bread and boiling broth. The king, eating at a long table with farmers and servants, says quietly, "Let us never forget this hunger, nor those who saved us from it." In the end, the king's journey is more than just a plea for food. It's a lesson in humility, a reckoning for all who thought power could shield them from suffering. You realize that true leadership is not in commanding armies or signing edicts, but in kneeling beside the weakest and asking for help. When you walk through the fields at dusk, the air heavy with the promise of rain, you think back to that morning in the village square. The king, alone and hungry, surrounded by his people, not a beggar, not a lord, but something in between, a man among men, shaped and humbled by famine. And you know deep down that when the fields finally bloom and the granaries fill again, the memory of this winter will linger. The king will never quite sit so high again, nor the people so low. For one season at least, all were equal, and hunger shared and survived was the only law. The king's journey through the mud and ashes of his own kingdom leaves more than footprints behind. It changes the rules by which everyone lives. Now in courtrooms and councils, from the palace to the humblest village, the famine has twisted the law itself. Hunger courts, people call them, though their official names are more dignified. Extraordinary tribunals, emergency councils, royal commissions, their business, deciding not just who should eat, but who may be eaten, and how far justice should stretch in a starving land. The very notion of justice, you notice, has shifted with the scarcity of food. Once the courts dealt in theft, trespass, feuds over land and lineage. Now, They deal in questions nobody wants to ask out loud. Is hoarding a greater crime than stealing? Should a baker be punished for cutting his bread with sawdust? Is it treason to feed your children before your lord? In famine, the answers grow murky and the punishments both more creative and at times more forgiving. You witness your first hunger court in the draughty hall of a manor, the fire barely burning. The judge, a lord whose own cheeks are hollow, sits behind a battered desk. The scales of justice replaced by a half-eaten loaf. The accused is a miller, caught hiding 2 sacks of barley in a barn's false wall. The evidence is clear. The villagers hiss. Hoarder. The man defends himself, voice trembling. It was for my old mother. She's too weak to walk to the market. The judge sighed. If I punish you, we all go hungry for a day. If I let you go, who will trust the market? In the end, the sentence is strange but fitting. The grain is to be divided among the village, but the miller is forgiven and told, next time, share what you have. Justice has become quite literally edible. Elsewhere, you hear of far harsher fates. In the city, a merchant is caught selling bread made of chalk and sawdust. The crowd drags him before the city magistrate. Once, such a fraud would have earned a fine and a warning. Now the sentence is exile, banished from the city walls, forced to fend for himself in the wilds. Even the magistrate looks uncomfortable, but no one protests. Better 1 man starve than 100 be poisoned, the baker says, and the crowd nods grimly united. But famine's laws bend both ways. You see courts forgive old debts. Peasants who could never repay grain loans are released from their oaths. The fields will return, the judge proclaims, and so will your fortunes. For now, let no man go to gaol for an empty stomach. Prisoners are freed for petty crimes, their only requirement to work in the community fields, planting whatever seeds can be found. Once such leniency would have caused outrage. Now it's simple practicality. Every hand is needed, and nobody can afford vengeance. In the heart of the city, you find a different kind of judgment. The cathedral's nave is crowded, the pews filled with accused and accusers alike. Here, the bishop himself presides, Bible in hand, but his verdicts are less about sin than survival. A woman is caught stealing onions from a merchant's stall. Did your children eat? The bishop asks. The woman nods, weeping. He blesses her, then asks the merchant to share what little he has. In famine, even charity can be compulsory. Sometimes the hunger courts are forced to address rumors of cannibalism, edible justice. The whispers call it black humor masking horror. One day, you hear of a man brought before the council, accused of eating the flesh of a dead neighbor. The air is thick with dread. The judge, pale and trembling, asks only, "Was he dead before you began?" The man's silence is his answer. The court does not sentence him what punishment could match what he has already endured. He is banished not for his crime, but for reminding everyone of what the famine can make of a man. With the famine's grip, strange new laws emerge. Eating cats, dogs, and vermin is quietly legalized. The Butchers' Guild starts offering recipes for emergency meat. The palace posts a decree: no man shall be punished for snaring pigeons on royal land, so long as he leaves the eggs. Rats, once despised, are now traded in the market for their meat and hides. The jester jokes that next week we'll all be eating shadows, and nobody laughs for fear he's right. You watch as village elders gather by firelight to make hard choices. Which children will be sent to beg in the next town? Which animals must be slaughtered before they grow too thin? Should the last stores be reserved for the very young, or the very old? Every answer comes with a price, every judgment with a cost. There is no justice without pain, no law that is not, in the end, written in hunger. The palace is not immune. The king's council, once a place of pomp and ceremony, is now a war room for survival. The chancellor presents a new list of pardons. Debtors, thieves, even a few accused rebels are to be released, in exchange for loyalty and a place in the fields. The queen, her hands rough from garden work, speaks for the children, urging that all families with infants be given a double ration. The king listens, weighing every plea against the dwindling supply. Yet not every law bends to mercy. Some nobles, desperate to protect their own, set up private courts, passing swift and brutal judgments. A rumor spreads that a baron's steward was hanged for stealing a single loaf. Another, that a lady's maid was whipped for hiding potatoes under her skirts. These stories spark outrage in the villages, where hunger has bred not only suffering but also a dangerous sense of justice. If the lords can judge us, so can we judge them, the peasants say, and some begin to do just that. The church, too, faces dilemmas. The bishop preaches forgiveness, but when the cathedral's stores are found to be larger than admitted, an angry mob storms the crypts. The bishop pleads for order. These are sacred stores, meant for the sick and dying. But the crowd is past listening. You see the priest himself dividing bread among the people, sobbing as he hands over the last crusts. Despite the chaos, you sense that something deeper is happening. Famine is making the law human again. Rules that once protected the powerful now must serve the hungry. You hear it in the way people talk, less about what is owed and more about what is needed. Justice is a warm meal, the headman says. Everything else can wait. As spring's first green shoots begin to appear, hope and law walk hand in hand. The hunger courts gradually dissolve as food returns to the land, but their memory lingers. The people remember the night justice tasted like turnip soup, and the day a king begged for bread and forgave his enemy's debt. The old codes, etched in parchment and stone, survive. But now, beneath them, there is a new unwritten law. Never let a neighbor starve in silence. If you do, famine will return, not just to the fields but to the heart of the kingdom. You leave the last hunger court as dusk settles, the bells tolling for evening prayers. The judge's final words ring in your ears. Go home, eat what you have, share what you can, and pray for rain. In famine, it turns out, justice is not blind. It is hungry, hopeful, and sometimes, if you're lucky, just as the first shoots of spring poke through the muddy earth, something like relief shivers through the kingdom. But famine's legacy is not so easily shaken off. With every green sprig and every pale flower comes a fresh reminder of what has been lost and what is yet to be rebuilt. You feel it everywhere, in the cautious optimism of the peasants sowing new seeds, in the hollow eyes of nobles watching their fields, in the silence that lingers in every home touched by hunger. It's as if the entire land is holding its breath, waiting to see if hope is a false spring or the true return of plenty. The fields, once muddy wastelands, are alive with activity. You join the villagers as they gather at dawn, clutching what few seeds they manage to save or barter for. The memory of the king begging at their door lingers. Some carry it as a point of pride, others as a wound. There are no great feasts, no boisterous planting songs this year. Instead, every furrow is turned with a quiet determination, every seed pressed into the earth with a silent prayer. Please let it grow. For the first time, the noble families are present in the fields, sleeves rolled up, boots sinking into the same mud as the common folk. You see the young baron, face thin and burned by the wind, showing a farmer's son how to mend a plough. The countess, her jewels sold for barley, kneels beside a widow to help plant onions. Even the king's eldest daughter, cheeks ruddy from cold, joins the labour, her laughter hesitant but real. It's a strange, tentative camaraderie, born of shared suffering. Yet the old suspicions have not disappeared. In one corner of the village, a group of men argue over the division of seed, tempers flaring as old grievances resurface. I lost more than you, hisses one, and your field lies closer to the Lord's granary. A village elder, voice rough with experience, intervenes. We survive together. If we fight now, the famine wins. The words settle over the group, calming them for a moment, but you sense that the wounds will take time to heal. The palace, too, feels the shift. Gone is the rigid hierarchy of service and command. Instead, you see a strange kind of democracy unfolding. At mealtimes, the king eats not at a raised dais, but at the long tables with his household and servants. The menu is still plain stew bread, whatever wild greens the foragers bring, but it is shared equally without privilege. You see the king passing a bowl to the youngest page, the queen pouring water for a visiting village girl, and the steward quietly counting loaves to be sure there is enough for all. Spring is not just the season of planting, it is the season of rebuilding. The market, so recently ruled by black marketers and despair, begin to refill with new produce. You walk through stalls where peasants trade cabbage seedlings and onion sets, where the new grain kings swap tales of secret stores and near misses. Old debts are quietly forgiven. A smile or a nod takes the place of angry words. The jester stages a play about the great carrot robbery, and this time the laughter is real, not forced. Yet not all is joy. The shadows of famine linger. You find children tracing names in the dirt, listing the friends who did not live to see spring. Mothers keep a tighter grip on their little ones, eyes haunted by memories of winter sickness. Even the animals are slow to return. Many barns are empty and the once mighty herds are reduced to a few scraggly cows and nervous chickens. You hear of villages where the well water is still bad, where the graves outnumber the living. Religion, too, has changed. At Sunday services, the prayers are softer, more honest. The bishop, thinner now and less proud, offers a new sermon. Remember your hunger and remember your neighbour. The altar is adorned with a single loaf and a handful of beans. Instead of tithes, people bring seeds, eggs, and milk to share. The churchyard, once a place of sorrow, has become a kind of community pantry, watched over by the oldest women who portion out food with fairness and a hint of sternness. One morning, you see a travelling merchant enter the village square, his cart heaped with salt, smoked fish, and green onions. He's greeted not with suspicion, but with cautious hope. The villagers barter fairly. The old hunger court's now only a memory. Even the merchant's jokes, "My eels are so fresh they bite back," raise more smiles than groans. This is how the kingdom heals, not all at once, but through countless small bargains and everyday kindness. Still, there are scars that will never fully fade. At a feast to mark the first harvest, you notice the empty places at the table, honoured with sprigs of rosemary and silent toasts. The king, when he rises to speak, does not boast of royal power, but thanks the people who fed his family. "We survived because we stood together," he says, voice thick. Let us never again forget what it means to be hungry, or what it means to be kind. In the months that follow, you see the birth of new traditions. The first bread baked from the new wheat is divided among all, rich and poor alike. The strongest boys and girls lead a procession to the fields, laying wreaths for those lost in the famine. A day of remembrance is declared. No work, no feasting, just quiet gratitude and a sharing of stories. The king enacts a new law. No taxes or tithes on food for a year, and every village to keep an emergency store. The land must feed the people first, he declares. And though some nobles mutter, most nod in agreement. You hear of lords building new granaries, of priests teaching the children how to plant and harvest, of widows organizing kitchens that feed every mouth. It is not a perfect peace, but it is better than what came before. The famine has made the kingdom wiser, if not richer. People look out for one another, share tools and advice, and keep a wary eye on the sky. When rain clouds gather, there is worry, but there is also a sense of readiness. The village council, once a sleepy affair, now debates matters of drainage, crop rotation, and grain storage. The peasants have a voice, and the lords, newly humbled, listen. As the first full harvest comes in, you stand in the fields and watch as golden grain sways in the breeze. The children run between the sheaves, chasing grasshoppers, laughing in the sunlight. The smell of baking bread drifts from every cottage. You think of the winter just past, of empty bellies and full graveyards, and you marvel at the stubbornness of hope. Yet, even now, you sense the lessons are not forgotten. At supper, every family leaves a crust on the windowsill for the hungry ghost of famine, just in case. When a stranger knocks at the door, he is given bread and water before any questions are asked. In the palace, the king keeps a sack of barley in his private chambers, a reminder that even crowns can go hungry. You realize that what endures after famine is not just life, but the memory of how close it came to vanishing. The kingdom is knit together not by law, or blood, or even bread, but by the simple act of sharing, of meeting need with kindness, and fear with hope. As the days grow longer and the harvest is gathered in, you walk home through a land transformed. The fields are green, the markets busy, the church is full of song, and for the first time in many seasons, you believe not just in the return of plenty, but in the possibility that the lessons of famine will not be lost. Night falls, soft and warm, over a kingdom that knows hunger and chooses every day to answer it with generosity. As summer deepens and the kingdom's scars begin to fade beneath new green, a strange quiet settles over the land, a hush as if everyone is listening, half afraid that famine will hear laughter and return. But life in its stubborn way keeps pushing forward. The markets are lively again, the bells of distant churches echo on soft mornings, and the king's couriers ride out not with edicts of desperation, but with invitations to the harvest festival. Yet in every smile and in every bowl passed around a crowded table, there is an unspoken memory. The season when even the highest were brought low, and the humblest learned their own strength. Summer brings a feverish activity, as if the entire kingdom is trying to outrun the ghosts of winter. You see it in the fields, where the crops are tall and the peasants' laughter comes easier, if still a bit cautious. Children who survived the hunger are now running wild, hair sun-bleached, chasing each other between rows of rye and barley. The elders watch them with bittersweet smiles, recalling the long dark months when laughter seemed like a memory. You hear old women mutter, "Let the little ones play. Joy is good for the land." The palace, too, is changed. There is no longer the cold distance between royal and commoner. At midday, the king takes his meal in the garden, joined by villagers and nobles alike. The food is simple: fresh bread, cheese, ripe berries from the new bushes along the wall. But it is enough. You see the queen, hands stained with berry juice, laughing as she teaches a pack of children how to weave garlands. The youngest prince leads a group in a game of Chase the Crow, and for a moment it is easy to forget that any of them were ever hungry. But some things are not forgotten. Each village holds a day of remembrance, where the names of the lost are recited, candles set on the church steps, and the first fruits of every harvest are shared among the poorest. In the palace, the king keeps a small table in the great hall set for the guest who could not stay, a reminder, visible to all, of those claimed by hunger. It is not gloom that hangs over these rituals, but gratitude and a kind of solemn promise, never again if we can help it. You travel from village to village, watching how each community finds its own way to heal. In some, the trauma has led to innovation. You see new irrigation ditches, barns built by joint effort, fields protected by communal fences. The peasants are proud, no longer just tenants, but stewards of the land. In others, the wounds are still raw, arguments flare over boundaries, and some hold grudges that will take another season or another generation to mend. But even here, when someone stumbles, a hand is always offered. You realize the famine has taught the value of both independence and interdependence. The black markets have not vanished. Some of the grain kings are now legitimate merchants, their fortunes made and remade by hardship. Others have faded back into the shadows, ready for hard times should they return. But for the most part, the desperation that drove men to theft and women to barter away their wedding rings has been replaced by a culture of sharing, if only out of hard-learned wisdom. The village squares are still full of haggling, but the stakes are not life or death. The king's new laws are simple and plain. Grain stores are never allowed to run empty. Taxes are measured not in gold but in surplus. No one is asked for what they cannot give. There is always a hunger store kept under lock and key in every parish, and it is said that the key must hang in the poorest man's cottage. The nobles who once grumbled now visit the markets themselves, buying seed and salt, and listening to the talk of the fields. Some still sneer, but most have learned humility, and a few have become the people's fiercest advocates. At the summer's end, the king calls a great gathering, a festival, but more than that, a promise to the future. You stand in the crowd as banners wave and musicians tune their lutes. There are games and contests, and for the first time in years, tables groan under the weight of food. Yet, there is no gorging, no boastful excess. Instead, plates are shared, and the old and weak are served first. During the festival, a moment is set aside for silence. The king rises, his family beside him, and faces the crowd. He speaks not of glory or conquest, but of memory and mercy. We learn that a crown is no shield against hunger, he says quietly, and that the strength of a kingdom is not in its walls or its wealth, but in the hands that work its fields and the hearts that share their bread. The crowd is hushed. Some weep openly, remembering lost family, empty winters, and nights when hope seemed as distant as the summer sun. The Queen adds her voice, promising that never again will the cries of the hungry go unanswered. If ever you see our table too full, or our hearts too proud, remind us of this season, she says. Her words are echoed by villagers, children, even the jester who stands solemn for once, holding a crust aloft in tribute to the humble loaf that kept us all alive. The festival ends with the planting of a new tree at the heart of the palace gardens. It is a small, tough apple tree, chosen for its hardiness, watered by the hands of the king, the poorest orphan, and the oldest peasant together. As the tree is set in the earth, the people join in a chant that spreads from mouth to mouth. Let there always be enough. It is not magic. It is not a cure for the future, but it is a seed of memory, of kindness, of shared resolve. That night, as candles flicker in every window, you wander through the sleeping kingdom. In the stillness, you remember the hunger, the cold, the begging, and the fear. You remember the moments of courage and kindness, the unlikely alliances, the lessons learned in mud and ashes. You see, with new eyes, the truth that famine leaves behind, that hunger is not only a curse, but a teacher, that kings and peasants can beg and share and rebuild together, that hope, once nearly lost, can be grown like a harvest, season by season. And as you settle at last into your own bed, grateful, full, humbled, you know the land itself is resting, preparing for the next sunrise. The famine has passed, but its wisdom lingers in every heart, in every crumb, in every promise whispered over the fields. 300-word wind down. The night is gentle now. The air drifting through the window is cool, sweet with distant hay and damp earth. You let your eyes close and listen. Far off an owl calls. Somewhere a cart rumbles softly on a lane. In the hush, the world feels safe again, as if all those long, hungry nights have been gathered up and tucked away beneath the new planted fields. Your breath slows. You think of the faces you met along the way, hungry and hopeful, fierce and kind, and you let the memory of them soothe you, like the lull of rain on a warm roof. You remember the king, humbled and grateful, the children laughing in the sunshine, the promise made beneath the apple tree. There is peace in knowing that even the hardest seasons come to an end, and that the ties woven in hardship are never truly broken. The darkness deepens, soft as velvet. The weight in your chest lifts, replaced by a quiet certainty. You have survived, and so has the king.